What's up guys, welcome back. This is Anime Crossover. You'll be watching What If Naruto Was a Saiyan Who Crash Landed in the Marvel Cinematic Universe Part 3. Now, let's begin. The Ghost of the Drive and the Eye in the Dark. The drop of Pepper Potts' tablet on the concrete floor sounded like a gunshot in the silent laboratory. She focused on the big mechanized gantry. The Mark III armor hung suspended, resembling the terrible, unnamed flying war machine that was currently dominating every major news network. It was charred, dented, and leaking a faint trail of hydraulic fluid from a grazed joint, but its towering, regal silhouette was undeniable. Pepper's gaze wandered to Tony, who was standing in a sweaty undersuit, and then to the golden-haired youngster clutching a half-finished turkey sandwich. "Tony," Pepper said, her voice wavering from the frightening reality of the past 3 months. "The news, the jet, that was you. You went to Afghanistan." "I took a brief sabbatical," Tony explained, stepping off the disassembly platform. He reached down, picked up her tablet, and returned it to her. "I wouldn't call it a vacation. The in-flight movie was terrible, but we got the job done." Pepper exclaimed, "You could have been killed." The professional assistant vanished, revealing a horrified Buddy. "There are bullet holes in that suit. And you," she exclaimed, swinging her finger at Naruto. "You went with him." Naruto ate his lunch. He gazed down at his bare chest. Aside from a few mud stains and a slight scuff mark from catching a supersonic missile, he was completely unhurt. "I am the shield of this village," Naruto replied calmly, without any sense of urgency or remorse. "The Man of Iron required Overwatch. We dismantled the threat." Pepper drew her hands through her strawberry blonde hair. "The threat? Tony, you just engaged the United States military. The Air Force is screaming about a UFO." "Technically, they were screaming about 2 UFOs, Bruce Banner interjected, stepping out of the lab. He was carrying a datapad and appeared equally fatigued but surprisingly calm. "And for the record, Tony didn't engage the Air Force. He just outflew them. Naruto was the one who caught the live missile." Pepper cautiously turned to face the scientist. "Bruce, you knew about this. You helped them." "I'm the guy in the chair, Pepper," Bruce stated with a feeble shrug of apology. "I monitor the radar." Pepper observed the 3 individuals. The irresponsible billionaire, the extraterrestrial warrior eating deli meats, and the fugitive scientist running communications. The situation's complete ridiculousness removed the fright, leaving just cold, stark disbelief. "Why, Tony," she whispered, hurt, "you shut down the weapons division. You survived. Why put yourself back in the crosshairs?" Tony's sardonic armor melted away. He strolled over to his primary workbench and picked up the manila folder she had noticed him holding earlier. He took out the satellite images of Gulmira and gave them to her. "Because I didn't shut it down, Pep," Tony explained softly. Pepper stared over the images. She noticed the Stark Industries crates. She spotted the 10 Rings terrorists. "Obadiah," Tony murmured, his voice hardened. "He's been double-dealing under the table. He filed the injunction to lock me out so I couldn't see the shipping manifests. Worse, he's the one who hired them to kill me in the desert." Pepper gasped, bringing her hand to her mouth. "No, Tony, Obadiah has been a friend to your father, to you." "His heart beats to the rhythm of a thief," Naruto said from across the room while eating his meal. "He smiles, but he calculates the cost of your funeral." Tony nodded grudgingly. "The kid called it out at the gala. I didn't want to believe it, but the math is undeniable. Obadiah is running a shadow empire inside my company." Pepper glanced at the photographs, feeling betrayed much like Tony. She'd organized Obadiah's itinerary, arranged his flights, and served his coffee. Pepper straightened her posture and asked, "What do we do?" Her fearful tears turned into a hard, clear concentration of a CEO. "We fight," Tony stated. "But we can't do it with repulsors. Not yet. I need proof. I need the ghost in the machine. Obadiah has a secure server in his office. It's physically isolated from JARVIS's mainframe. I need you to go into his office, plug a ghost drive into his terminal, and pull the shipping manifests. Once we have the data, we take it to the feds." Naruto offered to go, stepping forward. "I can bypass his physical security. I can retrieve the machine." "No," Tony shook his head. "If you go, it's a break-in. It's an act of war. If Obadiah catches you, He calls security, and then we have to explain why a glowing teenager is kicking down doors at Stark Industries. Pepper has access. She belongs there. It has to be her. Tony glanced at Pepper, his black eyes begging. It's dangerous, Pep. If you don't want to do it, I understand. I'll figure another way. Pepper examined Tony's blazing chest as well as his bullet-riddled armor. Give me the drive, she responded, her voice unwavering. Sector 16 is located miles away, beneath Stark Industries' contemporary headquarters. It was a gigantic underground bunker that was fully disconnected from the rest of the company's network. Obadiah Stane stood behind a blast-proof glass, hands clenched behind his back, expression filled with rage and anger. On the opposite side of the glass, suspended in a gigantic hydraulic gantry, was an engineering nightmare. It was the Ironmonger. The suit, almost 12 feet tall, was a terrifyingly upscaled version of Tony's original Mark I design. It was a walking tank equipped with massive rotary guns, hydraulic crushers, and localized missile pods. It lacked the Mark III's smooth, aerodynamic grace and was designed for pure, brute force destruction. It's magnificent, Obadiah said to himself. However, it had died. William Ginter Riva, the lead engineer of the Shadow Project, approached Obadiah, wiping sweat from his brow. His lab coat was grease-stained, and his hands were shaking. Sir, Riva muttered, brandishing a flaming circuit board. We have a problem. Obadiah slowly turned his head, his eyes cold and lifeless. I do not pay you to have problems, William. I pay you to solve them. Why isn't the suit online? It's the power interface, sir, Riva hastily said. The technology you brought us from the desert, the pneumatic joints, the servo motors, we've reverse-engineered all of it. But the power source, we can't replicate it. Tony Stark built a miniature arc reactor in a cave, Obadiah stated, going closer to the horrified engineer. With a box of scraps. I'm sorry, sir, Riva whispered and backed away. But I'm not Tony Stark. The plasma containment field destabilizes at that size. It requires a synthetic element we simply don't have the formula for. The suit is perfect, but it's a paperweight. We can't power it. Obadiah gazed at the big, dead machine. His empire was about to collapse. Tony had survived assassination attempts, shut down weapons manufacturing, and now, judging from press stories of a flying metal man in Afghanistan, he had perfected the technology. If Tony revealed the armor, Obadiah's Ironmonger project would become obsolete before it had started. Obadiah slowly reached up and touched his own chest. Obadiah murmured, he has the heart, with a terrible, homicidal resolve on his face. If he won't share it, I'll just have to carve it out of his chest. Night fell over Malibu cliffs. The mansion remained quiet. Tony had finally collapsed from tiredness and slept in his bedroom for the first time in weeks. Bruce Banner was meditating in his chambers while keeping the beast firmly attached to the ocean floor. Naruto Uzumaki sat in the lotus position on the glass balcony, with the fresh ocean breeze ruffling his golden hair. He wasn't asleep. A Saiyan metabolism powered by a yellow sun required unusually little rest, and his shinobi instincts refused to turn off when the hamlet was under attack. He directed his sovereign senses outward, casting a gigantic, invisible net across the estate. He observed the constant slamming of the waves against the rocks. He tracked Tony and Bruce's slow, tired heartbeats. Suddenly, his ears twitched. His eyes opened, revealing a faint blue glimmer in the darkness. His sensory network had detected an irregularity. It wasn't a blip on the radar or an alert on Jarvis' security system. There was a biological presence. Someone was inside the house. The intruder's heartbeat was slow, controlled, and quite peaceful. There was no adrenaline rush, no irregular heartbeat of a thief. It was the organic rhythm of a ghost who belonged just where he was. Naruto stood up quietly. His golden aura did not ignite. He completely controlled it, blending into the balcony's shadows. He moved with the eerie silence of a predator, slipping through the sliding glass door and into the huge, dimly lit living room. The chamber was only illuminated by the moonlight reflecting on the water. A man stood near the center of the room and casually examined a modern art sculpture. He was clothed in an impeccable dark suit. He was absolutely defenseless, and his hands were loosely in his pockets. Naruto silently slid from the arched ceiling, landing behind the man. "Your metal machines are blind," Naruto warned, his voice low and deadly. "But I am not. How did you bypass the spirit in the wires?" The man did not flinch. He didn't panic. He simply turned his head, giving a soft, controlled smile. "Jarvis is a highly advanced artificial intelligence," the man said with an even and pleasant tone. "But his firewall architecture relies on an outdated shield algorithm. I simply asked him to temporarily pause his auditory sensors in the living room." Naruto narrowed his eyes and studied the man's posture. He was not a soldier, like Blonsky or the Ten Rings. He was something else, a spy. "Who are you?" Naruto shouted, adjusting his weight and preparing to incapacitate the intruder. The man carefully reached inside his suit jacket. Naruto's muscles stiffened, preparing to react to a weapon, but the man only brought out a thin, sleek business card and held it between two fingers. "My name is Agent Phil Coulson," the man stated. "I'm with the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division." Naruto did not take the card. He stared at Coulson. "You represent the military. We represent the planet," Coulson gently corrected before returning the card to his pocket. "And right now, the planet is experiencing some growing pains. An unregistered, flying iron suit engaging in unauthorized combat in the Middle East is one thing. We can manage the press on that." Coulson took a bold stride forward, unaffected by the teenager's intimidating stature. "But an extraterrestrial entity catching a supersonic Sidewinder missile with his bare hands." Coulson's smile disappeared, replaced by a harsh, unwavering authority. "That is an entirely different jurisdiction. My director would like to speak with you, Mr. Uzumaki, as well as Mr. Stark, because you've just demonstrated to the world that we are no longer alone." Tony Stark padded into the living room, wearing a loose t-shirt and pajama pants, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He paused, marveling at the scene before him. The alien intern, emitting a deadly golden aura, was in a tense standoff with a balding man wearing a poor suit. "I leave you alone for 5 hours, Tony moaned, stepping over to the bar to get himself a drink of water. "Jarvis, why is there a secret agent in my living room?" "My apologies, sir," Jarvis' voice sounded annoyed. "Agent Coulson utilized a highly classified override code embedded in the shield framework I was originally built upon. I have since patched the vulnerability." "You better have," Tony growled. He turned to Coulson and took a drink of water. "Shield, right? The Strategic Homeland, whatever, you guys need a shorter name." "We're working on it," Coulson said easily. He did not look at Tony. His gaze was locked on Naruto. "Mr. Stark, your unauthorized excursion to Gulmira has caused an international incident. My director is willing to help you spin the narrative, but we need to know what we are dealing with. Specifically, the young man who can catch a supersonic missile." Naruto did not let down his guard. "You move like the Anbu Black Ops of my world," Naruto said, noting the unique, emotionless discipline of a veteran spy. "You are a shadow. But shadows burn in the sun." "Easy, kid," Tony murmured, stepping between them. He stared at Coulson. "Here's the deal, Phil. I am currently restructuring my company, surviving assassination attempts, and trying to keep my blood from turning to battery acid. I don't have time for a secret boy band meeting with your director. Give Pepper a call, make an appointment." Coulson's benign expression hardened somewhat as he gazed at Tony. "You are playing a dangerous game, Mr. Stark. You think you are the only players on the board. You are not. When you are ready to see the bigger picture, we will be waiting." Coulson turned and approached the door. He paused and returned his gaze to Naruto. Impressive reflexes, by the way. As the door closed, Naruto loosened his position. "He is dangerous, Stark. He does not carry weapons, but he carries the authority of an army." Tony rejected. "He's a bureaucrat in a suit, with concerned eyes." He laid his drink down. "We have bigger problems. Jarvis, where is Pepper?" "Miss Potts has just entered the executive suites at Stark Industries headquarters, sir," Jarvis said. "She is initiating the bypass protocol on Mr. Stain's terminal now." The executive floor at Stark Industries was dark and silent. Pepper Potts stared behind Obadiah Stain's mahogany desk, terrified as she plugged the silver USB drive into a concealed slot beneath the console. "All right, Jarvis," Pepper muttered, nervously looking toward the office's opaque glass doors. I'm in. A progress bar displayed on the screen. Files began to quickly copy to the ghost drive. Pepper accessed a hidden folder named Sector 16. Her breath caught in her throat. The screen was loaded with large, complicated designs. It was a suit of armor, but it was grotesque, a massive, heavily weaponized creature that dwarfed Tony's Mark III. The Ironmonger. A video file drew her attention. She clicked it. Raza, the Ten Rings commander, had a damaged and deformed face that took up the entire screen. You did not tell us the target was Tony Stark, Raza snarled in the recorded communication while surrounded by desert rock in the Afghan cave. The price for his life has just gone up. We require the new shipment of Jericho missiles, or we send him back to you in pieces. Pepper covered her mouth, tears of betrayal searing her eyes. Obadiah had not simply looked the other way, he had actively negotiated Tony's killing. What are we looking at, Pepper? The voice was a low and heavy rumble. Pepper froze. She slowly turned her head. Obadiah Stane stood in the doorway, clutching a glass of whiskey, with a chilly, vacant expression. The progress bar on the screen reached 98%. Pepper lied. I was just looking for the quarterly projections, despite her urgent attempt to preserve her professional demeanor. Obadiah entered the room carefully, his heavy footsteps muted by the thick carpet. He moved around the desk, eventually pausing immediately behind her chair. He gazed at the screen. Raza's video was gone, replaced by a generic screensaver, but the little USB device remained shining in the port. Quarterly projections, Obadiah said gently. He put a strong hand on her shoulder. You know, Tony always relied on you for the details. He never looked at the big picture. He doesn't understand that the world is built on compromises. Beep. The download has completed. Pepper took the disk from the port and hid it in her palm while grabbing a stack of papers from the desk. She straightened up, forced herself to look into Obadiah's icy, dead eyes. I should get these to legal, Pepper replied, moving away from the desk. Obadiah watched her. For a scary second, he appeared to reach out and snap her neck. But he only smiled. Have a good night, Pepper. Pepper stepped out of the office. She did not sprint until she reached the elevator. As the doors closed, she slumped against the wall, her heart pounding against her ribs. When the elevator arrived at the foyer, she dashed toward the glass doors. Miss Potts. A man in a sharp suit emerged from the shadows. It was Agent Coulson. He held a file. I have that appointment with Mr. Stark. Your shield, right? Pepper asked, her eyes wide with dread. I need your help, right now. Back in Malibu, Tony stood in the living room, gazing out at the black ocean. He was alone. Bruce and Naruto were down in the green room. Tony had explicitly requested that they resume their training, knowing that the strong vibranium tungsten walls separated them from the rest of the house. He needed them to focus on controlling the Hulk, not hovering over him. Sir, Jarvis said, Miss Potts has successfully extracted the data. She is currently en route to a SHIELD safe house with Agent Coulson. Tony exhaled a deep breath of relief. Good. Lock down the servers, Jarvis. Don't let Obadiah access anything else. Tony turned around. Obadiah Stane stood in the midst of the living room. He had a little, sleek device in his palm. Jarvis, Tony demanded, stepping back. How did he get in? There was no response. The security grid remained entirely silent. I built this company, Tony, Obadiah stated, stepping forward. You think I didn't leave a few back doors in your digital butler? Obadiah raised the device. Stark Industries had created a non-lethal weapon called a sonic paralyzer to control crowds. He pressed the trigger. A high-frequency sonic wave struck Tony directly in the chest. It made no sound, but it immediately short-circuited his nerve system. Tony's eyes rolled back, and he dropped on the white sofa, fully motionless. He could see and hear, but couldn't move a single muscle. His lungs froze, making each short breath a painful fight. Obadiah approached and stood above the paralyzed billionaire. He gazed down with pity and great arrogance. Obadiah sighed and reached into his pocket for a specialized extraction tool. It's a shame, you survived the desert. You had a second chance. But you just couldn't leave well enough alone. Obadiah ripped Tony's shirt, revealing the bright blue arc reactor. When I ordered the hit on you, I worried I was killing the golden goose, Obadiah murmured as he attached the extraction tool to the reactor's metal ring. But fate is a funny thing. You brought me the one thing I needed to finish the job. Obadiah brutally removed the arc reactor from Tony's chest. Tony let out a silent cry and convulsed fiercely. The wire leads separated, and the electromagnet that kept the shrapnel away from his heart died abruptly. Obadiah held the shimmering blue ring up to the moonlight and admired its scary power. This is your legacy, Tony, Obadiah stated, turning away. A new generation of weapons. And I'm going to put them right in the center of the board. Obadiah exited the glass doors, leaving Tony Stark to die in the darkness. Tony slipped from the sofa, his vision fading into darkness. The shrapnel in his chest continued to shift, moving closer to his heart with each irregular, dying beat. He dragged himself across the floor, his fingers feverishly clawing at the flooring, attempting to reach the stairs down to his workshop. He required the old reactor. Pepper framed the crude, initial prototype in glass. Naruto Uzumaki and Bruce Banner sat cross-legged in the deep depths, sheltered by 3 feet of tungsten and acoustic dampening gel. Hold the anchor, Naruto instructed Bruce during the meditation. Naruto abruptly stopped. The acoustic gel muffled sound. The vibranium absorbs kinetic impact. However, neither could interfere with a human soul's bioelectric frequency. Naruto's sovereign senses functioned as a biological radar, and he had spent the previous 3 months precisely tuned into Tony Stark's repetitive, mechanical heartbeat. The beat had suddenly halted. Naruto's eyes sprung open. The calm, diligent shinobi disappeared. Bruce was taken aback by the dread in the boy's eyes as he asked, "Naruto?" Naruto didn't respond. He did not use the door. He unleashed his primal pulse to its full potential, resulting in a dazzling pillar of light. He launched himself straight up, driving his fists against the green room's ceiling. The Saiyan's kinetic power broke the vibranium weave after only a microsecond. Naruto ripped through 3 stories of solid concrete and steel before bursting out of the living room floor in a spray of rubble. He landed among the destroyed hardwoods. He discovered Tony Stark laying near the glass stairwell. The billionaire's face was ashen, and his lips bluish. The huge hole in his chest was dark. Naruto lowered to his knees, his hands hanging above Tony. For the first time since entering this universe, Naruto experienced absolute, crushing helplessness. He could punch a rocket out of the sky, but he couldn't stop the minuscule metal shards from piercing Tony's heart. Tony's eyes flickered open. He gazed at the ecstatic adolescent. He lifted a trembling finger and pointed down the stairs toward the lab. Naruto understood immediately. He carefully cradled Tony before disappearing down the stairs. He burst into the shop. Tony gestured to his desk. The table has a glass display case. Inside was the cave's original arc reactor, surrounded by a metal ring inscribed with the words, "Proof that Tony Stark has a heart." Naruto sat Tony down on the floor. He did not bother attempting to open the glass cabinet. He punched his fist through it and grabbed the heavy, primitive reactor. "How?" Naruto shouted, holding it over Tony's chest, frightened of electrocution. Tony reached up with quivering and slow hands. He grasped the reactor and inserted it into the dark, empty socket in his chest. He connected the internal wire leads. The device locked into place with a crisp click. The soft blue light sprang to life. Tony gasped, arching his back off the floor as the magnet suddenly re-engaged, drawing the shrapnel back millimeters from his heart. He dropped against the concrete, his chest heaving, drawing in big, desperate gasps. Naruto knelt beside Tony, his golden aura gradually withdrawing as he saw the color return to his face. "Stain," Tony gasped out, his voice harsh and raspy. "He took it. He's powering the suit. He came into our village," Naruto muttered, his blue eyes growing steely and the predatory instincts of a Saiyan warrior latching on a target. "He stole your heart." Tony stood up and leaned heavily on the workbench. He gazed at the empty glass cabinet, then at the adolescent next to him. The treachery hurt more than the shrapnel, but the rage blazing in his chest was more intense than the reactor. "Help me up, kid," Tony instructed, his dark eyes focusing onto the computerized gantry where the crimson and gold armor awaited. "We have to stop him before he turns that monstrosity on Pepper." Stark Industries Sector 16 was a mausoleum, not an office. Agent Phil Coulson led a 5-man shield strike team down the dark, cavernous tunnel, using large flashlights to illuminate the area. Pepper Potts strode securely in the center of the formation, arms wrapped about herself and clutching the admission card. The security feeds have been completely wiped for this entire sublevel, Coulson stated, his voice devoid of the mild-mannered tone he had employed in Malibu. He clutched his suppressed sidearm in a low, ready grip. Stay sharp. Pepper scanned her card through the massive blast doors. The red light flashed. Access denied. He locked me out, Pepper muttered, feeling a cold knot of dread tighten in her gut. Coulson did not hesitate. He motioned to one of his soldiers. The operative moved ahead and attached a small, highly concentrated breaching charge to the electronic lock. Pop! The lock melted to slag. Coulson pushed the huge doors open, leading the crew to the massive, basement assembly floor. A few emergency backup lights created long, menacing shadows across the discarded tools and dangling cables, but otherwise it was pitch black. The large hydraulic support beams in the center of the chamber were vacant. It looks like your boss has vacated the premises, Miss Potts, Coulson replied, sweeping the empty gantry. Pepper stepped forward, looking into the shadows. He wouldn't just leave. The blueprints. The suit was the size of a tank. You can't just hide it. A sound echoed in the far corner of the large room. There was a hefty, mechanical clank, followed by the deep, resonant whine of a gigantic pneumatic cylinder engaging. Coulson's crew immediately aimed their rifles at the sounds. A ray of light emerged from complete darkness. It was a frigid, piercing blue light, the distinct glow of an arc reactor. But it wasn't as big as Tony's heart. It was huge and illuminated a thick, heavily armored chest plate. A mechanical monster's scary faceplate was revealed by 2 tiny red lights above it. The Ironmonger emerged from the shadows. It was 12 feet of raw, unpainted titanium and steel, loaded with hefty explosives. It dwarfed the SHIELD agents. Pepper, Obadiah Stane's voice roared from the suit's external speakers, twisted into a metallic demonic howl. I always said you were Tony's best asset. But you're too damn loyal. Fire! Coulson ordered. The agents launched a volley of gunfire. The rounds flashed and ricocheted off the Ironmonger's incredibly thick plating, causing little damage. Obadiah laughed and raised a gigantic hydraulic arm. On his forearm, a huge rotary Gatling cannon began to fire. Run! Coulson yelled, pushing Pepper toward the exit as the Gatling gun screamed. The concrete pillars of Sector 16 were crushed into dust. The SHIELD agents dispersed, outnumbered by the walking tank. Pepper dashed down the corridor, the sound of gigantic, earth-shaking footsteps following her. Obadiah broke through the reinforced walls like they were drywall, aiming to silence the only witness to his betrayal. A crimson and gold streak, escorted by a roaring meteor, lit up the night sky above Los Angeles. Tony Stark's HUD in the Mark III displayed a persistent red warning. Sir, Jarvis' voice was tight. The Mark I arc reactor was not designed for sustained flight or combat parameters. You are currently operating at 19% power. It is dropping rapidly. Tony gritted his teeth, his pale visage reflected in the illumination of the helmet interior. Reroute life support. Dump the non-essential diagnostics, he said. He felt the armor's ponderous, sluggish response. It was hardly the slick, limitless machine it had been in Afghanistan. The battery was expiring. Stark, Naruto's voice cut through the communications. The adolescent was soaring parallel to him, his golden aura lighting up the skies. Your heart beats with a weak rhythm. You cannot fight an army in this state. I don't have to fight an army, kid, Tony responded, pushing the thrusters harder despite Jarvis' warnings. Just one very big, very angry old man. Listen to me. Obadiah is in a suit built for war. He has my old reactor, which means he has superior firepower and shielding. You run interference. Keep him off the civilians. I will break his shell, Naruto declared, speeding past Tony with a golden spear aiming toward the Stark Industries complex. Pepper dashed through the main lobby's glass doors and out onto the street. The ground below her erupted. The Ironmonger erupted underground, launching asphalt and crushed cars into the air. Obadiah landed hard on the roadway and aimed his enormous rotary gun right at Pepper's retreating back. Obadiah yelled, "No more running, Pepper." He did not have the opportunity to pull the trigger. A brilliant crimson and gold blur smashed into the ironmonger from above. Tony hit Obadiah at Mach 1 and tackled the enormous suit around its torso. The energetic transfer caused both machines to skid down the asphalt, digging a large trench in the road and propelling them through the front windows of an adjacent office building. Pepper slipped, fell to her knees, and gasped for oxygen. Naruto landed effortlessly alongside her before the dust had settled. He didn't make a crater. Instead, he effortlessly absorbed his own velocity, positioning himself directly between Pepper and the damaged structure. "Are you injured?" Naruto inquired, his blue eyes searching her quickly. No, I'm okay," Pepper exclaimed, glancing at the golden-haired girl. "Naruto, that suit. Obadiah has Tony's reactor." "I know," Naruto said, his voice chilly. He looked up and saw the jagged hole in the structure. "Stay behind me." Inside the office, the two machines furiously untangled. Obadiah threw Tony off, sending the Mark III smashing through a cubicle wall. "Tony," Obadiah laughed, his suit's hydraulic joints squeaking as he stood up. "You're alive. I'm impressed. But look at you, your suit is sleek. It's pretty. But mine is the future." Tony stood up carefully. "Power is at 13%, sir," Jarvis warned. "Yeah, I can feel it," Tony said. He raised his right gauntlet and unleashed a repulsor blast. The ironmonger's strong ablative plating absorbed the beam that struck him directly in the chest. Obadiah did not even flinch. "My turn," Obadiah sneered. He launched a targeted micro-missile from his shoulder pod. It detonated at Tony's feet, propelling the Mark III backward out of the building and onto the street. Tony landed hard on the pavement, his armor groaning with the impact. Obadiah emerged from the rubble, lifting his hydraulic fists to smash the fallen billionaire. Shunshin. Naruto appeared straight in front of the ironmonger. Obadiah paused and looked down at the glowing teenager. The alien, Stain's metallic voice growled with grim humor. "I saw the satellite feeds from Gulmira. You're strong, kid, but you're made of meat. And I am made of iron." Obadiah aimed a 3-ton hydraulic backhand toward Naruto's head. Naruto did not dodge. He elevated his left forearm, increasing his Zenkai density to its utmost maximum. Clang. The sound of the impact rang for kilometers. The ironmonger's enormous metal fist hit Naruto's bare arm. The tremor smashed every piece of glass on the street. Naruto's boots slid backward on the asphalt, creating 2 deep grooves, but his arm remained intact. He did not even bend. Obadiah's eyes widened in surprise while inside the cockpit. The hydraulic pressure gauge on his arm flashed a critical alert. The metal of his own gauntlet had dented from contact with the boy's skin. "Your iron is heavy," Naruto murmured, his voice echoing with a deep, resonant primal frequency, vibrating through the metal of the monger's suit. "But the man inside it is hollow." Naruto stepped forward. He did not utilize an open palm. Instead, he clenched his right hand into a fist, producing a focused spike of golden plasma over his knuckles. He punched Ironmonger in the knee. The kinetic force fractured the strengthened pneumatic cylinder. The massive armor plate buckled inward with a painful crunch. Obadiah yelled, his enormous suit lurching to the side as his leg failed. He fired the Gatling gun blindly, and the high-caliber bullets ripped into the roadway. The automatic targeting system struggled to track Naruto's rapid movement. He appeared on the monger's right flank, grasping the whirling barrels of the Gatling cannon with both hands. He did not smash them this time. He used his horrifying strength to pull the entire weapon system from the suit's arm, flinging the 2-ton piece of machinery casually over his shoulder. Naruto yelled, "Tony," and pinned the enormous suit's arm to the side. "The shell is cracked. Strike the core." Tony pushed himself from the ground. "Power at 9%, he exclaimed. "Reroute everything to the chest," Tony ordered. "Jarvis, Unibeam, now." The Mark I reactor in Tony's chest emitted a brilliant, frantic light. A tremendous, concentrated blast of raw plasma exploded from the core of the Mark III, striking the Ironmonger square in the chest. Naruto's damaged armor allowed the Unibeam to penetrate the outer shell and overheat the internal circuits. Obadiah yelled when the suit system sparked and flashed red. "No, I am not losing to you." Obadiah used his boot thrusters in a desperate attempt to survive. He didn't have flight stabilizers, he only had raw upward vector thrust. The Ironmonger broke free from Naruto's grip, rocketing into the sky and crashing into the roof of Stark Industries' main arc reactor building. Tony shouted, "He's running for the roof," as his suit locked up. "Jarvis, talk to me. Power at 2%, sir. Flight systems are offline." Tony was a grounded, half-ton statue. Naruto glanced up at the fleeing Ironmonger and then back at Tony. "I will ground him," Naruto pledged. The golden light erupted around him. He knelt and hurled himself into the air, a streak of pure light pursuing the mechanical beast. Obadiah smashed violently onto the glass roof of the arc reactor building, causing the enormous suit to groan as it attempted to stabilize. He gazed down through the skylights to see the huge arc reactor, which powers the city, humming below. Obadiah, enraged, screamed into the open communication channel, "If I can't have the company, Tony, no one will." He raised his remaining arm, preparing to launch a missile directly into the main reactor, causing an explosion large enough to level 10 city blocks. The roof experienced extreme pressure. Obadiah gently turned his huge mechanical head. Naruto Uzumaki hovered squarely in front of him. The teen was no longer holding back. The primal pulse screamed around him, twisting the atmosphere and creating a terrible, localized gravitational field. His azure eyes were without mercy. "You do not understand the power you stole," Naruto replied quietly. Naruto did not fly forward. He extended his right hand. He used his biomagnetic anchor to capture the magnetic field of the iron armor, rather than securing himself to the ground. Obadiah attempted to move. The hydraulic motors hummed, the servos shrieked, but the Ironmonger remained entirely immobile. It was held in a vice of pure, invisible kinetic power. Obadiah screamed in horror as he saw critical failures on his screens. Naruto landed on the glass roof and approached the motionless giant slowly. Naruto responded, "I am taking back his heart." Naruto approached the Ironmonger's enormous chest plate. He raised his palm, generating a compact, spinning orb of golden plasma known as the Primal Rasengan. He did not force it into the suit. Instead, he gently put it against the strong armor plating immediately above the stolen arc reactor. The whirling, superheated plasma functioned like an atomic drill. It smashed through the titanium steel alloy in milliseconds, melting the reinforced glass enclosure. Naruto plunged his bare palm into the hot, sparking hollow. His Saiyan skin ignored the extreme heat. His fingers gripped tightly around the arc reactor's bright blue ring. Naruto used a hard pull to remove the Ironmonger's power source. The enormous suit died quickly. The red lights on the faceplate flickered and went dark. The hydraulic pressure was released, and the 12-foot mechanical behemoth dropped to its knees on the glass roof, entirely dead. Obadiah Stane was confined inside a tomb he created. Naruto held the stolen reactor and felt its powerful energy. He then examined the lifeless suit. "Agent Coulson will need a crane to extract you, thief," Naruto informed the dark faceplate. Turning away from the Ironmonger, Naruto jumped off the roof and landed on the street below. He landed softly next to Tony, who was seated on the curb with his suit fully locked up. Pepper was kneeling beside him, attempting to take the helmet off. Naruto extended his hand and offered Tony the bright blue arc reactor. "I believe this belongs to you," Naruto answered with a faint smirk. Tony looked at the reactor and then up at the adolescent. He let out a long, tired, static-filled laugh from within the dead suit. "Thanks, kid," Tony said. The result was a symphony of flashing red and blue lights. Shield black SUVs surrounded the Stark Industries campus, preventing the local LAPD and reporters from approaching. Agent Coulson ruthlessly managed the perimeter, ensuring that Obadiah Stane's extraction from the dead Ironmonger suit took place out of public view. Tony was safely retrieved from the Mark III. He was seated in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a shock blanket, with a fresh IV line pouring into his arm. The old, weak reactor in his chest was buzzing continuously, keeping him alive until Bruce could safely replace the improved core. Pepper sat alongside him, holding his hand, and the strain of the past few hours dissipated into quiet relief. Naruto sat on the bumper of a nearby shield, Suv, chewing the protein bar Coulson provided. He observed the agents working. They moved with the same focused, coordinated efficiency that shinobi used to clear a battlefield. Agent Coulson approached, holding a sleek datapad. He stared at Tony and then at Naruto. "We've contained the narrative," Coulson remarked calmly, his mood fully restored. "The official statement is that there was an industrial accident at the Stark campus involving an experimental robotics prototype. Mr. Stain tragically lost his life in a light aviation accident while flying to his private estate." Tony lifted his eyebrow. "Aviation accident? A bit cliché, isn't it, Phil?" "It's believable," Coulson corrected. "As for you, Mr. Stark, you were on your yacht. You have 50 witnesses who will swear you were drinking martinis all night." Tony examined the small index card Coulson handed him. "And the guy in the red and gold armor? The guy glowing like a glowstick who caught a missile on live military radar?" "We've classified the radar feeds," Coulson stated. "The official line is a glitch in the early warning systems, coupled with a private security contractor testing a new parachute. You are going to read exactly what is on those cards tomorrow morning at the press conference. Do not improvise." Coulson gazed at Naruto. "As for you, you do not exist. You are not on any camera. You are a ghost. My director strongly prefers it to stay that way until we figure out exactly what to do with you." Naruto took a bite from his protein bar. "I do not answer to your director, Shadow. I answer to my village." Coulson gave a courteous, stiff smile. "We'll see." The press room at Stark Industries was packed the next morning, much more so than when Tony returned from Afghanistan. The air was charged with speculations, leaked grainy images of the street combat, and whispers about a man of iron. Tony Stark had a sharp suit and a bandage on his nose as he stood behind the podium. He looked down at the index cards that Coulson had given him. Naruto took his normal seat in the rear corner of the room, blending into the shadows with folded arms. "There's been a lot of speculation," Tony said, his voice echoing over the sea of camera flashes. "I've been called a lot of things. A visionary, a warmonger, and now, apparently, some people think I'm a superhero." Tony looked down at the card. It read, "I'm not Iron Man." He looked up to the audience. He glanced at Pepper, who was beaming encouragingly. He glanced to the back of the room, where the alien adolescent who had taught him the definition of a genuine warrior waited in the shadows. Tony Stark had spent his life hiding behind money, drink, and sarcasm. But the fire in the cave had consumed that man. Tony dropped the index cards on the podium. "The truth is," Tony halted with a crazy, dazzling, and arrogant smirk. "I am Iron Man." Pandemonium erupted. The reporters scrambled, shouting, and the noise was deafening. In the back of the room, Naruto Uzumaki smiled genuinely. The Man of Iron had finally embraced his role. The village had a chief. As Naruto slipped out the side door to return to Malibu, his sovereign senses detected a tiny quake. It was not in Los Angeles. It was not even on Earth. The frigid shiver shook the very fabric of space. A distant, magical resonance indicated that the universe had recently noticed the noisy, arrogant planet and the Golden Warrior standing on it. 6 months after Tony Stark declared, "I am Iron Man," to a room full of screaming reporters, the world had fundamentally changed, marking the beginning of the Infinity Saga. The public perceived a golden age. The Stark Expo in Flushing Meadows was a glittering, year-long celebration of technological hope. Iron Man had effectively privatized international peace and served as a unilateral deterrent to global violence. The crimson and gold armor was widely used, adored by the people and dreaded by warlords. Behind the tinted glass of the Malibu house, the golden age was fading away. The subterranean bio-lab's harsh, sterile lights revealed a terrible reality. Tony Stark sat shirtless on a frigid medical exam table. The arc reactor in his chest pulsed with its familiar blue light, but the flesh around the circular shell was hideously discolored. A huge, fractal web of dark, necrotic purple lines extended from the device, following the pattern of his poisoned veins. Drive. Bruce Banner stood over a centrifuge, wearing reading glasses and holding a vial of Tony's blood up to the light. The blood appeared unusually dark. "Blood toxicity is at 24%, Tony," Bruce replied calmly, conveying the clinical weight of a death sentence. "It's up 4% from last week. The palladium core in the reactor is shedding heavy isotopes directly into your bloodstream. It's keeping the shrapnel out of your heart, but it's slowly killing your organs." Tony maintained his composure. He took out a small, portable mirror and observed the purple veins running across his chest. He gave a gloomy, self-deprecating smile. 24%. So I'm still 76% perfectly healthy, Tony said, tossing the mirror on the table. You're a glass half-empty kind of guy, Doc. We just need to find a replacement element. I've synthesized every known isotope on the periodic table. We just haven't found the magic bullet yet. You've exhausted the periodic table, Bruce corrected, looking at his holographic monitors. And I've run simulations on the alien biology upstairs. Naruto's cellular plasma, his primal pulse, is infinitely renewable, but it's entirely biological. We can't synthesize it into a solid-state metallic core without it detonating. You need a new element, Tony. One that doesn't exist on Earth. Tony scratched his temples as fatigue settled across his face. Well, unless Jarvis has a Stargate hidden in the garage, Earth is all we've got. A deep, subsonic vibration shook the laboratory's reinforced glass walls. It was not an earthquake. It was a limited, focused wave of kinetic energy that came from the outside balcony. Tony slipped his shirt on to conceal the necrotic lines. Speaking of the alien, let's see if he blew up my patio. They stepped out of the lab and took the elevator to the main living area. Naruto Uzumaki waged a terrible battle against physics on a sun-soaked balcony overlooking the Pacific. He was dangling 10 feet above the earth in a full lotus pose. His eyes were screwed tight, and his jaw was frozen in extreme concentration. The air around him was visibly distorting and shimmering with intense, localized heat. However, he wasn't beaming. The activity aimed to achieve this outcome. Naruto identified a key fault in his power after nearly letting Tony to freeze to death in Afghanistan's upper atmosphere. Releasing his golden primal pulse granted boundless speed and strength, but it was very volatile, killing everything in its path. He was attempting to weave a solar envelope. Using shinobi chakra control, he caused his Saiyan aura to fold back in on itself, producing a frictionless, superheated plasma barrier only millimeters above his epidermis. Bruce took out a tablet connected to the balcony's environmental sensors and said, "Check the telemetry. He's generating a surface temperature of 400 degrees Celsius, but the heat isn't bleeding into the ambient air. He's completely containing it. It's a perfect thermodynamic closed loop." Naruto gently opened his eyes. The strange blue iris flared with power. He inhaled deeply, and the shimmering distortion around his torso dissipated in an instant. He slowly descended to the wooden decking of the balcony. Tony replied, "You're getting better at that, kid," as he stepped out through the sliding glass doors. "A few more weeks and I won't have to pay a heating bill. You can just stand in the living room." Naruto focused sharply on Tony's chest. The garment concealed the purple veins, but Naruto's sovereign senses did not require line of sight. He could hear Tony's poisoned heart beat slowly and laboriously. "You smell of decaying iron," Naruto said honestly as he approached them. "The metal core is failing you." "I'm fine," Tony deflected, waving his hand. "Just a minor calibration issue. We're working on it." Naruto paused in front of the billionaire. He didn't press the subject. In the shinobi culture, a warrior's death was considered a private responsibility unless it compromised the objective. "If the core fails, I will restart your heart with my own hands. I have done it before." "Thank you, Dr. Frankenstein," Tony said, despite his cynical demeanor. "Sir, Jarvis," voice rang across the balcony speakers, with a rare, programmed tone of urgency. "I have just intercepted a massive, anomalous atmospheric disturbance on the SHIELD global surveillance grid." Tony's mood quickly became serious. "Define anomalous, J. Did another country figure out repulsor tech?" "Negative, sir. It is not technological," Jarvis said, pulling up a holographic globe in the living room. 30 seconds ago, an Einstein-Rosen bridge, a localized wormhole, opened in the upper atmosphere over Puente Antiguo, New Mexico. It deposited an object of unknown mass and composition into the desert. Bruce took a step forward and quickly analyzed the data on the holographic globe. "A wormhole. That requires an impossible amount of dark energy. Did SHIELD pick this up?" "Agent Coulson has already mobilized a containment team from their southwestern division," Jarvis said. Tony noticed a brilliant red dot over New Mexico. He stared down at his chest, feeling the intense, scorching pain of palladium poisoning. He couldn't fly his Mark IV armor halfway across the country right now. The persistent energy pull would exacerbate the toxicity, potentially killing him in mid-flight. Tony looked up to Naruto. "Kid," Tony murmured, his tone serious. "I'm benched. If I push the suit right now, the doc here will have an aneurysm. I need you to go play cowboy." Naruto crossed his arms. "You want me to investigate the tear in the sky? Be a ghost," Tony advised. "Shield is going to lock down that crater. Use that new thermal stealth trick you were just practicing to bypass their satellites. See what fell out of the wormhole. If it's a bomb, disarm it. If it's an alien," Tony stopped. "Just try not to punch a hole through it until we know what it wants." Naruto nodded. The idea of an alien oddity piqued his shinobi senses. A wormhole was a rupture in space, just like the spatial breach that had taken him away from the elemental nations. Naruto said, "I will find the fallen star." He didn't even bother to bring his gear. He walked to the edge of the balcony, and his golden aura flared inward, touching the solar envelope without any friction. He disappeared from the Malibu cliffs with a loud, concussive blast of air. A sonic shockwave spread across the Pacific. The New Mexico desert was a harsh place with scorched orange rock and endless scrub vegetation. It was very different from the gentle, changing sands of Afghanistan. Naruto got there 2 hours later, flying at Mach 3 high in the stratosphere. He turned on his sovereign senses and expanded his biological radar to cover a 50-mile radius as he flew down to the coordinates Jarvis had given him. He could feel the shield presence right away. Around a huge crater 50 miles outside the small hamlet of Puente Antiguo, there were dozens of black SUVs, hefty transport trucks, and people with fast heart rates. Naruto went down lower, hovering silently 2 miles over the crater. His solar envelope made him completely invisible to SHIELD's thermal surveillance. He plunged his senses into the middle of the crater. What he felt almost knocked him out of the sky. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't radiation. It felt like senjutsu. It was the most terrible and purest concentration of nature energy he had ever felt, but it was also a lot heavier. It smelled like ozone, rolling thunder, and the cold, empty void of deep space. It was heavenly. He focused his alien eyes on the middle of the shield camp. A short-handled war hammer sat completely still in the middle of the dirt crater. Its massive square head was made of a gray, unyielding metal. Naruto was amazed by how thick the aura of the weapon was. It bled lightning. But as he was concentrating on the hammer, he saw something else strange. The holy energy wasn't all in the metal. A faint, lingering trace of the same cosmic frequency ran out from the crater and across the desert to the little, distant village of Puente Antiguo. Shield had gotten the hammer, but they had no idea that the spirit had come with it. Naruto changed his path. He left the big military camp behind and followed the invisible path of cosmic energy to the town. There wasn't much to Puente Antiguo except for a main street with old stores and a dirty diner. Naruto quietly landed on the roof of a mechanic's garage in the area and crouched down behind an air conditioner. He took off his solar envelope, which brought his body temperature back to normal. He looked around the little town. The biological signals were mostly boring, locals' hearts beating slowly and without a care in the world as they went about their afternoon. Then, the door to Isabel's diner opened. A man stepped out onto the dusty sidewalk. He was huge, at least 6 feet 3 inches tall, with broad shoulders and large, strong arms. He had a big beard and long, golden blonde hair. He had on a very weird mix of clothes: a tight brown t-shirt, flannel slacks, and a dark jacket that appeared 2 sizes too small. But it wasn't how he looked that made Naruto stop. It was his genetic signature. The man's heart rate was high, pounding with a mix of deep anger and total perplexity. He had the physical density of a peak human, but his chakra network, which is like his spirit, was entirely broken. Naruto squinted his eyes as his shinobi analytical talents broke the man down. The man gave out the same cosmic, ozone-filled frequency as the hammer in the desert. But it was kept quiet. It was like a huge, unbreakable seal had been put over the man's core, keeping his full strength hidden and making him completely human. Naruto recognized that he was a warrior without a sword as he stood on the roof. He is a sealed thing. On the street, the big blonde man glanced up at the sky and made his hands into hard fists. The man yelled, "Heimdall." His voice was loud and theatrical, and it echoed off the small buildings. "Open the Bifrost. I am Thor, the son of Odin. You will answer me." He waited, staring at the clouds. The dry wind from New Mexico was the only thing that replied him. Thor put his head down, and a look of deep, painful shame crossed his face. He started to stroll down the sandy road, which led out of town. His heavy boots sent up clouds of dirt. He was going around without a goal, mainly because he was too stubborn to stay put. Naruto saw him walk. He knew the look in the man's eyes. It was the face of someone who had been forcibly ripped away from their home, their identity, and their authority. Naruto got off the roof. He fell to the ground without making a sound, landing in the dirt road 20 steps in front of the Asgardian who was walking around. Thor came to a standstill. His blue eyes narrowed as he quickly realized that something had changed in the air. The teen who was standing on the street had on dark cargo pants and a black t-shirt. His hands were hanging carelessly at his sides. But even without his heavenly powers, Thor still had the reflexes of a warrior who had fought in the 9 realms for 1,000 years. He knew when he saw a predator. "Step aside, boy," Thor said, his voice deep and commanding, expecting complete obedience. "I don't have a problem with you, but I won't be late." Naruto stayed still. He stood his ground and let the heated breeze mess up his spiky golden hair. Naruto said gently, "You smell like lightning," and his voice carried clearly across the distance. "But you don't have a storm. Why do you yell at the sky?" Thor's body stiffened. The pride surged up right away. "I am Thor Odinson, the god of thunder. I shout at the sky because it is mine to command." Or, it was. For a moment, his voice wavered as the cruel truth of his banishment hit him. Thor stepped forward with a lot of weight, rolling his broad shoulders. "Now, I don't want to deal with Midgardian riddles. Get out of my way, or I'll move you myself." Naruto gave a little, almost unnoticeable smile. He didn't make his golden aura shine. He didn't use his biomagnetic anchor. He just dropped his center of gravity into a loose, very balanced shinobi taijutsu posture, with his hands at chest level. "Your words are loud, Odinson," Naruto said gently. "Let's see if your fists are as heavy as mine." Thor laughed loudly, entirely missing the threat. He noticed a teenage boy. "You are brave, child," Thor said with a smile. The excitement of battle quickly took away his sadness. "But you are not wise. I will try not to break your bones." Thor charged. He moved like a brawler who had never lost a fight, with practiced, vicious speed. He threw a huge, wide right hook, hoping to put the teen out cold with just one strike. Naruto didn't move back. He stepped into the swing's huge arc. Naruto raised his left forearm with perfect, blinding accuracy to block Thor's massive bicep. The deflection sent the punch's kinetic energy entirely over Naruto's shoulder. Thor's eyes became wide with shock when his fist hit nothing. Naruto turned fast on his heel before Thor could get his footing back. He didn't employ his Saiyan power because that would have broken Thor's ribcage right away. Instead, he used pure, seamless momentum to drive the heel of his palm straight into the middle of Thor's chest. The sound of the collision was like a strong drum beat. Thor, who weighed about 250 pounds, was raised fully off the ground. He shot backward into the air for 10 feet before landing hard into the dusty road. He rolled twice before stopping in the ground. The god of thunder was lying on his back, completely shocked, looking up at the scorching New Mexico sun. He hadn't been hit with a lot of power. He had been taken apart by perfect skill. Naruto dropped his posture and stood erect in the middle of the road, looking down at the prince who had fallen. Naruto said, "You fight like a man who has never had to defend his life." His voice was not mocking. It was the stark, objective truth of a shinobi. "You fight like a weapon that thinks the world will shatter when it hits. But you are not a weapon anymore, Odinson." Thor moaned and pushed himself up on his elbows. He spat out a mouthful of dust, and his pride hurt a lot more than his injured chest. He looked at the teen and knew he was well outmatched. "Who are you?" Thor inquired, his voice losing its haughty boom and becoming real and confused respect. "You have the strength of an Aesir, but you move like a shadow." Naruto said, I am a warrior from a village that has been lost. He reached out a rough hand to the fallen god. And I think we have a lot to talk about when it comes to the hammer in the desert. Thor looked at the hand that was given. The hand was not that of a nobleman or a god. It was scarred, calloused, and wrapped in thick, unseen power. Thor grunted, half amused and half bruised pride, and stretched out to grab Naruto's forearm. The adolescent easily lifted the 250-pound Asgardian to his feet, as easily as a man lifting a feather. Thor brushed the mud off his jacket and replied, "You hit very hard for a Midgardian." Naruto said, "I'm not from Midgard." He knew the word from the Old Norse mythology he had read about on JARVIS's servers. He pointed back to the diner. "You are hungry. Your stomach growls louder than your words. I need food too. Let's eat and then you can tell me about the storm in the desert." 10 minutes later, the two lost warriors were sitting in a rear table at Isabel's diner. The server, a young woman named Darcy who had been watching Thor since he got there, brought him a huge spread of food. 4 dishes of scrambled eggs, 2 stacks of pancakes, sausages, and a pot of black coffee. Thor ate the food with the savage, raw hunger of a Viking ruler. He ate half a plate of eggs in one bite. He looked up, ready for the kid to be staring at him in fear. Naruto, on the other hand, was a blur of movement. The youngster with the golden hair had already eaten all of his pancakes and was now eating the sausages with a horrifying, mechanical efficiency that went against all logic. Thor stopped in the middle of eating, his fork halfway to his mouth. A huge, booming chuckle came from his chest, and other customers looked over. "By the Norns!" Thor yelled, hitting the table hard with his heavy fist, making the coffee cups shake. "You eat like Volstagg, but you hit like Hogun. I like you, Golden Warrior. What did you say your name was?" He said, "Uzumaki Naruto," and drank a glass of water to wash it down. Thor used the back of his hand to wipe his mouth. He was happy, but his mood changed a little when he peered out the diner window at the shield camp on the horizon. Thor's blue eyes got serious as he said, "You said you were from a lost village. You have the aura of a warrior, Naruto, but you don't smell like this world. How did you get here?" Naruto put his hands flat on the table. He didn't talk about where he came from very often. Tony knew the basics, and Bruce knew the biology, but neither of them comprehended how big and strange what had happened to him was. "Two great powers collided in my world," Naruto said quietly, looking far away. "The energy of my rival and me. The impact tore a hole in the sky. It pulled me through the darkness and dropped me on this planet in a desert of burning sand. My home, the elemental nations, is unreachable. It has been lost to the void." Thor leaned forward, resting his huge elbows on the table. He listened carefully, using his heavenly mind to make sense of what the youth was saying in terms of Asgardian cosmology. "Not lost to the void," Thor said softly, his arrogance fading for a moment as he spoke with great wisdom. "Naruto, the universe is not a flat plane. It is a tree, the world tree, or Yggdrasil." Naruto's eyes got smaller. "A tree, it's a metaphor for the structure of the universe," Thor said as he used a butter knife to make a rough, branching shape in a drop of coffee that had dropped on the table. "There are 9 realms connected by the branches of Yggdrasil. Asgard, Midgard, Jotunheim, all existing at the same time, stacked on top of each other in dimensional space. And beyond the 9 realms, there are countless other branches, other dimensions, pocket realities." Naruto's breath caught. His heart, soul, and sovereign senses all seemed to tremble at the news. Other branches. He wasn't stuck in a single, unavoidable void. There were still the elemental nations out there, on a distinct branch of the cosmic tree. The knowledge didn't make things better right away. The distance was still too great for a mortal to cross. But it did give him a terrifyingly beautiful spark of hope. Naruto looked at the coffee drawing and said, "You talk about dimensions like they're just roads to travel." "Yes, if you have the Bifrost," Thor said with a sigh, remembering how cruel it was to be sent away. He threw the butter knife on the table. "I am Thor, the crown prince of Asgard. My father, Odin the All-Father, threw me out. He took away my power, sent me to Midgard, and threw my hammer into the desert." Thor gazed at Naruto, and a desperate, burning fire lit up in his eyes again. Thor responded, "Mjolnir, the hammer in the crater. It is made from the heart of a dying star. It channels the storm, If I can get to it, if I can just wrap my hand around the hilt, my power will come back. I will be a god again. Naruto looked at the Asgardian. He noticed how desperate they were. He saw that the hammer was the only thing that made him feel valuable. Naruto replied softly, "You think the metal makes you a god? You think the weapon is the warrior?" Thor frowned, feeling insulted. "The weapon was made for me, and only I can use it." Naruto slid out of the booth and said, "Then we will go to the crater. The men in the dark suits have built a fortress around your hammer. They are heavily armed and won't let you through the front gate." Thor straightened up to his full, towering height, and a vicious, arrogant smile returned to his face. "Let them try to stop me. I've fought a lot of frost giants. A few mortals in matching armor won't stop me from getting what I deserve." Naruto turned to Thor. He observed a man who had to fall before he could learn how to stand. Naruto made it plain what he would do to help. "I will not fight them for you. A true shinobi must face his own challenges to regain his honor. But I will make sure that the mortals do not kill you from the shadows." A strong, driving rainfall came over the New Mexico desert as night fell. The shield camp around the crater was a great example of how quickly the military could set up. High-powered floodlights cut through the heavy rain and lit up chain-link fences, security towers, and a huge network of temporary plastic tunnels that led to the center of the impact zone. Agent Phil Coulson stood in the main command tent, looking at a row of security monitors and drinking a cup of coffee that was only slightly warm. Thor and Naruto were hunkered behind a rocky protrusion 50 yards beyond the perimeter fence. They were perfectly camouflaged in the dark and the rain. The rain was soaking Thor's blonde hair and making it stick to his face. He saw the armed troops going along the fence. He gazed at Naruto and didn't care about the storm at all. Naruto was completely dry. The rain hissed and disappeared as soon as it hit the invisible, skin-tight barrier of his solar envelope. His aura gave off a faint, golden light that made the blackness look odd and otherworldly. Thor said, "I see you have your own magic," as he watched the steam rise from the team. Naruto calmly said, "It's not magic, it's discipline." He pointed to a place on the patrol route that was out of sight. "Go. The path is clear. Get your storm back." Thor nodded, and a strong, primal smile spread across his face. He didn't try to be sneaky. He didn't know what the word meant. He got up, jumped over the rocky protrusion, and ran straight toward the fence around the property. Naruto stayed in the dark. He didn't use his body. Instead, he used his sovereign senses to cover the whole shield compound. He made a map of the heartbeats of the 50 operators within, keeping an eye on Thor's erratic and violent movement through the mud. Thor punched the first guard with a powerful right hook that knocked him down into the dirt right away. The alarms went off. The base went crazy. A voice cried over the compound's PA system, "We have a breach, Sector 4." Thor was a powerful force of nature. Even without his godlike strength, his size, speed, and years of fighting expertise made him a force to be reckoned with. He walked through the shield agents, throwing grown men through plastic walls and breaking bones with strong, sweeping blows. He fell in the mud and got hit hard in the ribs, but he didn't stop. He fought with the passionate, blazing conviction of a king who was going back to his throne. Naruto watched from the outside, sitting quietly on top of a tall chain-link fence post. He looked at how Thor moved. Naruto assumed that he only used raw force. He doesn't protect his sides. He fights to hurt people, not to get rid of the threat. Naruto's senses suddenly become stronger. A fresh biological signature surfaced high above the compound, in a hydraulic crane basket that hung over the crater. It was stable. The heart rate was dangerously low, and the breathing was normal. Naruto focused his eyes through the rain. A man in black tactical gear was standing in the basket. He didn't have a firearm. He had a very advanced composite bow in his hands. Clint Barton, often known as Hawkeye, knocked an arrow and pulled the bowstring back to his face with perfect, scary accuracy. He looked down at the fight in the muck below and followed Thor's path to the center of the crater. "Coulson," Barton said over the radio, his voice steady and professional. "I have a chance. Do you want me to take him down, or would you rather send in more guys for him to beat up?" Naruto didn't wait for Coulson to answer. He let go of his solar envelope and instantly disappeared into the dark, heavy rain. He turned on the body flicker. Barton eased his grasp a little while he waited for the order in the crane basket. All of a sudden, the steel cables holding up the basket made a noise. Barton felt like something was wrong. He turned around and pulled the bow back toward the back of the little metal cage. He was looking straight into the bright blue eyes of a teenage girl with golden hair. Naruto was standing on the thin, wet railing of the crane basket, perfectly poised against the wind and rain at such a great altitude. Barton didn't think twice. He let go of the arrow, aiming for the boy's chest. The arrow was a blur when it was 3 feet away, but to Naruto's Zenkai-adapted synapses, it was moving through thick syrup. Naruto just raised his palm and caught the carbon fiber shaft of the arrow an inch from his chest. Barton opened his eyes wide. He quickly grabbed a second arrow from his quiver and was ready to fight up close. Naruto's voice sliced through the storm and stated, "Your aim is true, Archer, but your target is safe." Naruto's hand shot forward before Barton could knock the second arrow. He didn't hit the man. He put 2 fingers on the brachial artery in Barton's neck, which stopped blood from flowing to the brain for a split second. Barton rolled his eyes back and fell heavily against the metal railing of the basket. Naruto grasped him easily and lowered the unconscious marksman to the floor of the cage. "The sky is clear, Odin-san," Naruto said softly as he looked down in the middle of the crater. Thor had burst through the last line of defense and was now in the muck. He was at the end of the plastic tunnel, breathing heavily and covered in muck and bruises from fighting. Coulson told the SHIELD agents to back off and watch. Thor stepped down the plastic slope and into the middle of the crater. There it was. Mjolnir, sitting on a pedestal made of fused rock. Thor chuckled, and it was a wet, happy, triumphant sound. He looked up at the sky, which was stormy, and the rain washed the filth off his face. Thor screamed, "I come back, Father." He moved forward and placed his huge, calloused palm around the leather-wrapped handle of the hammer. He braced his knees for the beautiful, electric wave of almighty power that was about to pour over him. He pulled. The hammer stayed still. Thor frowned. He changed how he was holding it and wiped the wetness from his eyes. He spread his feet out more, bent his big back and shoulders, and put all of his weight into the lift. He growled, and the muscles in his neck bulged with effort. The hammer stayed completely still. It felt like it was stuck to the center of the earth. If someone worthy grips this hammer, they will have the power of Thor. Thor heard the spell in his head. It seemed like a bodily blow when he realized it. It wasn't a test of strength. It was a decision. He wasn't worth it. Thor's hands fell off the hilt. He dropped to his knees in the mud. The thunder roared above him, making fun of him. He threw his head back and let out a scream of pain that was so bad it seemed like it was killing him. It sounded like a divinity dying in a mortal body. He lingered there for a long time, kneeling in the muck, with no fight left in him. A shadow came over him. Naruto Uzumaki fell from the sky without making a sound and landed in the mud next to the broken prince. He didn't turn on his heat shield. He let the rain soak his hair and clothes, feeling the harsh, hard truth of the moment. The SHIELD agents quickly lifted their guns when they saw the adolescent who had gotten past their whole perimeter. Agent Coulson forced his way through the agents and into the crater. He stared at Naruto and then at Thor. Coulson's eyes got a little bigger as he realized what was going on. Coulson said, "The ghost of Los Angeles," with his hand close to his gun. "You're a long way from Mr. Stark's basement." Naruto didn't pay any attention to the agent. He gazed down at Thor. Thor looked at Mjolnir's metal, which would not bend. "I am nothing," Thor murmured, his pride gone and only a hollow, crying man left. He was right. "I am a cruel, vain boy. I am not a king." Naruto whispered softly, "A king is not defined by the metal in his hand," as he crouched down in the muck next to him. Naruto leaned out and put his hand on the hammer's head. He didn't make an effort to lift it. He shut his eyes and pushed his sovereign senses straight into the Uru metal. He could feel the magic. It was a cosmic lock, made by a force that was very old and very hard to understand. It vibrated with the intensity of a star that was dying. Naruto understood that it was looking for a true heart. It wants sacrifice. Naruto opened his eyes and saw Thor's devastated, tear-stained face. Naruto said, "Your father did not take away your power to punish you, Thor." His comments echoed the wisdom of the third Hokage. "He took it away to teach you." A sword that has never been tested against its own flaws will break in real battle. Thor carefully raised his eyes to the teen. You fought your way through mud and pain to get here, thinking the weapon would save you, Naruto said, his voice full of confidence. But the weapon is just a tool. The real power is the person who uses it. You have to learn to walk like a mortal before you can fly like a god. Naruto straightened up and turned to look at Agent Coulson and the group of heavily armed agents. Naruto told Coulson, he is a prisoner of his own heart right now. He's not a threat to your world. He just attacked 50 highly trained federal agents, Coulson said, without backing down. He's coming with us. Mr. Uzumaki, my director is going to want to know why you're so far from home. Naruto didn't fight back. He didn't make his aura stronger. He crossed his arms and looked at Coulson with cold, deadpan blue eyes. Naruto said, take him to your cells. I'll wait for you to ask your questions. But know this, Shadow. If you try to hurt him, I'll tear down this fortress and take him back to my village. Coulson gazed at the boy and thought about the secret radar data that showed a golden meteor hitting a supersonic rocket. He told his soldiers to put down their guns. Naruto stood in the rain and watched the hammer, which wasn't moving, as the SHIELD agents pulled the fully cooperative, broken Thor out of the mud and put him in handcuffs. The universe was huge, with countless branches. But the warriors' lessons were the same for all of them. The god of thunder was about to find out what it meant to carry the will of fire. The SHIELD interrogation chamber was made to shatter a man's mental strength on purpose. The room was frigid, had no windows, and was lit by a single, harsh fluorescent bulb that buzzed at an annoying, random frequency. Thor Odinson sat at the metal table, his huge hands chained together, and stared blankly at the shiny steel surface. He looked like a shell of the man who had killed 50 skilled agents barely an hour before. Agent Phil Coulson stood in the corner with his arms folded, watching the deity who had fallen. Coulson stated in a calm, clinical voice, "You made my men look like mall cops. That takes training, special forces, maybe Spetsnaz, but you don't fight like a soldier. You fight like you own the ground you walk on." Thor did not blink. He didn't say anything. There was no sound at all. Coulson groaned when he realized that the questioning was going nowhere. He tapped the earbud in his right ear. "Watch him. I'm going to talk to the other one." Coulson left the room and proceeded down the clean plastic hallway of the makeshift facility to a second holding cell. This cell was not the same. It wasn't a normal interrogation chamber. It was a fortified containment module with thick, clear polycarbonate glass on all sides. Naruto Uzumaki was sitting on the floor with his legs crossed. He didn't have handcuffs on. The hefty steel shackles that SHIELD had tried to put on him were now in two pieces in the corner of the room. They broke like fragile twigs as soon as they were clicked onto his wrists. He didn't break them out of anger, he just thought they were uncomfortable. Then he sat down and waited. Coulson stood on the opposite side of the glass with a big file in his hand. Coulson read from the file, "Uzumaki Naruto. No birth certificate. No social security number. No known aliases before 3 months ago, when Tony Stark found you. Literally." Naruto opened his eyes, and the bright blue light cut through the low light of the jail. "Your men are wasting their breath on him, Shadow. He is in mourning and will not talk to you." Coulson raised an eyebrow and said, "He's mourning a hammer?" Naruto said, "He is mourning a reflection." He looked into the metal and saw that he was empty. It hurts a warrior to have to face this truth. Coulson moved closer to the glass. "And what about you? You're not empty. You caught an AIM-9 Sidewinder missile with your bare hands. My director wants to know if you're a mutant, an enhanced experiment, or something else entirely." Naruto said in a calm voice, "I am a guest." Before Coulson could push the matter, the hallway got quite cold. It wasn't a draft. The air was chilly right away, and it smelled sharp and stinging like ozone, old ice, and something completely alien. Coulson shuddered and pulled his suit jacket closer. He tapped his earphone and said, "Did the climate control just stop working?" "Command, check the HVAC. It's cold down here." Naruto didn't shiver inside the confinement. His sovereign senses flared up in a big way. This wasn't the strong, loud stormy energy that Thor had. This energy was frigid, slippery, and very misleading. It crawled through the SHIELD compound without setting off any of the thermal sensors, motion detectors, or armed guards. Naruto had heard that frequency before, from his years of fighting in the elemental nations. Naruto recognized that it was genjutsu, and his muscles tightened. A magician. Naruto stood up and said, "Open the door." Coulson frowned. "We're not done yet. A snake has entered your fortress," Naruto murmured in a low, deadly voice. "Open the door, or I'll take down the wall." Coulson gazed into the teenager's eyes. The golden aura started to flash under Naruto's skin, sending a strong, hot light against the polycarbonate glass. The huge, scary danger wasn't a bluff. Coulson knew the glass could stop anti-tank shots, but his gut told him it wouldn't hold the youngster for even a second. Coulson used his keycard. The hefty door opened with a hiss. Naruto moved quickly down the hall to Thor's interrogation room, completely disregarding the SHIELD agent. Thor was no longer alone in that room. Standing opposite the fallen prince was a guy clothed in dark green and gold Asgardian armor. His skin was pallid, his raven black hair was slicked back, and his green eyes reflected a heavy, forced sadness. Loki, the god of mischief, defied mortal security with a simple spell of concealment. "Loki," Thor muttered, his voice cracking with desperate hope. "What are you doing here?" "I had to see you," Loki murmured quietly, his voice full of sorrow. "To say goodbye." Thor's chest tightened as he asked, "Goodbye? Why?" "I must speak to Father. I must explain." Loki interrupted, saying, "Father is dead," with ease. "Your banishment, the threat of war with Jotunheim, it was too much for him to bear. The Odin's Leap took him, but it was too late. He is gone." Thor dropped into his chair, the words hitting him harder than any blow he had ever received in fight. A hoarse, excruciating sob erupted from his throat. The last pillar of his existence had just collapsed. "The throne falls to me now," Loki added, inserting a psychological knife deeper. "And our first act must be to maintain the truce with the frost giants. They demand your permanent exile, Thor. I am sorry, I cannot bring you home. Mother has forbidden your return." "No," Thor sobbed, burying his face in his shackled hands. "Please. Farewell, brother," Loki muttered, turning to go with a chilly, smug sneer. "He lies." The voice, though not loud, sliced through the frigid air of the interrogation chamber like a scorching razor. Loki turned around. A teenager with golden hair stood at the open doorway. Agent Coulson stood close behind him, perplexed, for Thor appeared to be completely alone in the room in Coulson's eyes. The cameras showed nothing. The thermal sensors detected nothing. Naruto spotted him perfectly. Loki's green eyes narrowed, revealing genuine amazement on his pale face. His cloaking spell was old Asgardian satyr. No human mind should have been able to penetrate it. "What are you?" Loki said, his projection flickering slightly. Naruto entered the chamber with his blue eyes fixed on the trickster god, claiming to be able to hear his heartbeat. And it beats with the slow, steady rhythm of a coward weaving shadows. Thor looked up, his tear-stained face twisting in uncertainty. "Naruto, to whom do you speak?" "Your brother," Naruto remarked, pointing to the vacant place where Loki stood. "He stands before you, cloaked in an illusion. And he feeds you poison." Loki smirked and raised his hand. A crackle of green magical energy erupted at his fingertips, meaning to forcefully erase the teenager's memory. Loki screamed, "You overstep, mortal," and launched a concentrated bolt of mental manipulation squarely at Naruto's head. The green magic affected Naruto, and quickly vanished. Genjutsu in the shinobi world involves altering the victim's chakra network in the brain. However, Naruto's biochemistry was saturated with the primal pulse, an ocean of roaring, confined sun plasma. The moment Loki's icy, magical energy attempted to infiltrate Naruto's nervous system, the primal energy aggressively rejected it, destroying the spell like a drop of water on a hot fire. Naruto did not even blink. He took another step forward, his golden aura blazing brightly, driving the cold out of the room. "Your tricks do not work on me, Shadow," Naruto warned. He cast his look down at Thor. "Your father is not dead. The grief you feel radiating from this projection is entirely fabricated. It is a tactic to break your spirit so you will not attempt to return to your village." Thor gazed at the empty area and then at Naruto. Thor's damaged mind was shaken by the teenager's unwavering truth. "Loki?" Thor asked, rasping. "Is this true?" Naruto's aura disrupted Loki's projection, causing the spell to flicker. The trickster god gazed at the kid with pure contempt. This wasn't immortal. This was an abnormality that jeopardized the entire coup. Enjoy the mud of Midgard, brother, Loki spat, his voice echoing oddly throughout the chamber. And you, boy, I will remember your face. The frigid pressure in the room evaporated instantaneously. The ambient hum of the fluorescent lights has returned. Loki was gone. Agent Coulson entered the room, observing the security camera in the corner before addressing Naruto. Who were you talking to? A snake with a crown, Naruto said, turning back to Thor. Thor wiped his face, breathing heavily. The crushing, paralyzing grief was gradually diminishing, leaving behind a profound, aching bewilderment. He lied to me, my own brother. Why? Power, Naruto stated simply. In my world, brothers have killed entire clans for the throne. If he weaves illusions to keep you here, it means he fears what you will do if you return. I am mortal now, Thor murmured, looking at his tied hands. I have no power to challenge him. Then you will find a new power, Naruto said, reaching down and effortlessly cracking the heavy steel cuffs holding Thor's wrists, causing a loud crack. You have mourned the metal. Now, it is time to forge the man. Agent Coulson, a SHIELD operative shouted from the corridor, racing up to the door. Sir, we have a situation at the front gate. A Dr. Eric Selvig is here. He's claiming the suspect is a Dr. Donald Blake. He has ID. Coulson massaged his eyes as the headache from earlier returned with a vengeance. He was aware that the ID was false. He was aware that Donald Blake was a cover tail. But he also knew he had an invincible youngster who could rip the base apart if he pressed the issue, as well as an alleged alien prince who had recently been cleared by a phantom visitor. Let them go, Coulson sighed before walking away. But put a tail on them. I want to know everywhere they go and everyone they talk to. After 10 minutes, Thor and Naruto exited the SHIELD property and entered the chilly night air. An elderly man with a wrinkled face, Eric Selvig, was waiting near an SUV. He appeared afraid, but stubborn. Enter, Selvig instructed, opening the door. He looked at Naruto. Who is the kid? He is a warrior, Thor replied, slipping into the rear seat, his manner muted but the vacant emptiness in his eyes replaced with a smoldering, determined spark. Naruto climbed in with him. They drove back to Puente Antiguo silently. Selvig drove up to the neighborhood bar, a neon sign buzzing dimly in the darkness. Selvig said, Jane and Darcy are inside, and parked the automobile. He turned and looked at Thor. I don't know who you are, or what you were doing in that crater. But Jane believes in you. And I promised I would get you out. Thor nodded respectfully. I am in your debt, Eric Selvig. Thor opened the door and went outside. He looked at the neon sign and then at Naruto. In Asgard, when a warrior faces a crossroads, he shares a drink with his brothers, Thor added, his former humorous attitude reviving. Will you join me, Uzumaki Naruto? Naruto crossed his arms. I do not consume the poisoned water of this realm. It dulls the senses. Thor laughed loudly and clapped Naruto's shoulder. Then you shall drink the milk of cows, and I shall drink the ale. Come, we have a throne to reclaim, and I must learn how a mortal fights a god. The local pub in Puente Antiguo smelled of stale beer, sawdust, and the strong, unmistakable flavor of approaching hangovers. Eric Selvig had concluded that heavy drinking was the only way to digest the existence of SHIELD, a stolen hammer, and a luminous alien youngster, so he ordered a round of Boilermakers. Thor sat next him, downing the shot of whiskey and followed it with the lager in one seamless move. Thor did not slam his empty glass on the table and demand more. He laid it down carefully, marveling at the amber froth that clung to the rim. Jane Foster and Darcy Lewis sat across from them in a cracked vinyl booth. Jane's gaze shifted quickly between Thor and the golden-haired youngster seated at the end of the table, her brilliant scientific mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. Naruto Uzumaki denied the alcohol. He sat very still, clutching a big glass of ice water and studying the dynamics of the crowd. So, Darcy replied, leaning forward and resting her chin on her hands. She gazed at Naruto. You caught a missile. Like, a real, explode-y missile. I deactivated the internal processor before the proximity fuse could engage, Naruto simply corrected. Right, cool, cool, Darcy nodded softly. And you glow in the dark. Only when necessary. Jane couldn't control herself. The energy readings we picked up during the atmospheric anomaly. When Thor arrived, they matched the Einstein-Rosen bridge model. But the thermal blooms we're getting off you right now, they don't match anything. It's like sitting next to a contained fusion reactor. How do your cells prevent spontaneous combustion? Naruto saw the anxious scientist. He noticed echoes of Tony Stark and Bruce Banner in her gaze. The mortals of this realm were preoccupied with understanding the mechanics of power. My biology adapts, Naruto replied simply. The fire does not burn the vessel if the vessel is made to hold it. Thor sighed deeply and leaned back in the booth. He is an anomaly, Jane. A warrior from a distant branch of the world tree. He possesses the strength of an Aesir, but the discipline of a monk. Thor gazed at Naruto with a vulnerable expression, shorn of his arrogance. You said I fight like a man who expects the world to shatter, Thor replied, his deep voice booming over the quiet buzz of the bar. You were right. For 1,000 years, I have relied on my godly strength and the storm within Mjolnir. If an enemy blocked my path, I struck harder. If they raised a shield, I broke it. Thor stared down at his calloused, enormous hands. But now, the strength is gone. The hammer rejects me. I am as fragile as these mortals. How does a man fight when he cannot break the world? Naruto set down his water glass. He glanced at the fallen prince, observing the precise moment when a spoiled heir begins the difficult transformation into a true ruler. Naruto spoke with the authority of a shinobi instructor, emphasizing the need of fighting to protect rather than conquer. When you rely on absolute strength, you do not learn the rhythm of battle. You do not see the environment. You only see the target. Naruto groped for the peanuts scattered on the table. Naruto said that in his culture, a true warrior uses everything. The wind, the shadows, the fear in the enemy's eyes. If a man is larger than you, you do not meet his strike. You use his momentum to break his balance. If his armor is thick, you do not punch the iron. You strike the joints. You fight with your mind before you ever close your fist. Thor listened intently. It contradicted everything he had learned in Asgard's golden halls. Naruto offered to educate them, leaning back in the booth. Tomorrow, at dawn, we will begin with your stance. You carry your weight entirely in your shoulders, ready to swing a heavy weapon. We will lower your center. We will forge the mortal. Thor expressed gratitude with a long nod and sad eyes. I accept your teachings, Naruto Uzumaki. The usurper king walked the polished flooring of the throne room, bathed in the endless golden twilight of Asgard, high above the mortal realm. Loki grabbed Gingnir, the All-Father's golden spear, with white knuckles. The big hall was empty, and the profound quiet heightened the wild, angry tempest racing in his imagination. He broke my enchantment. Loki recalled the chilly, clean questioning room on Midgard. He had created a faultless illusion, an old satyr concealment that Heimdall's all-seeing gaze would struggle to penetrate. However, the golden-haired mortal had not only seen him, but he had also burned away the magic with a localized aura that felt like a sun's heartbeat. He is not a Midgardian, Loki growled in the empty chamber. He is an anomaly. Loki knew Thor. His sibling was arrogant, rude, and readily influenced by grief. Thor would have wasted his mortal life wallowing in mud, finally drinking himself to death. The throne would have been secured. However, the anomaly had altered the equation. The Golden Boy had broken the illusion of Odin's death. He had offered Thor a road forward. He was transforming the broken prince into a legitimate menace. I cannot allow him to adapt, Loki declared, his emerald eyes narrowing with icy, malicious resolve. He exited the throne room and moved quickly through the palace's great corridors until he reached the armaments vault's massive doors. Inside the vault, past the casket of ancient winters and the eternal flame, stood a large and formidable person. It stood 10 feet tall and was made of black uru metal with internal fires. It had no face, no soul, and no compassion. It was an automaton of pure, destructive magical energy, programmed to destroy everything its master instructed. Loki approached Gingnir, banging its base against the smooth floor. The destroyer's internal fires ignited, emitting a fiery orange glare. Go to Midgard, Loki said, his voice booming in the vault. Target the town of Puente Antiguo. Eradicate my brother. Loki halted, remembering the searing blue gaze. And the golden child, Loki said, his voice lowering to a sinister whisper. Burn him to ash. The next morning in New Mexico was unusually quiet. Naruto and Thor stood in the dusty dirt lot behind Isabel's diner. The sun had barely risen beyond the horizon, creating long, sharp shadows across the desert. Thor was shirtless, sweating heavily, and chest heaving. Naruto had spent an hour relentlessly correcting the Asgardian's posture. Every time Thor unconsciously raised his shoulders to mimic a hammer attack, Naruto delivered a precise, painful kick to the back of his knee, forcing him to lower his center of gravity. You were frustrated, Naruto observed, ducking Thor's slow, telegraphed jab. You want to hit me. But your anger makes your movements loud. I am a warrior, not a dancer. Thor exclaimed, wiping sweat from his brow. A dead warrior, Naruto corrected, sweeping Thor's front leg and sending him flying back into the soil for the 20th time that morning. Naruto quickly froze, stopping Thor from complaining. His blue eyes widened as his head swung toward the horizon. The beautiful morning sky was suddenly twisted. A gigantic, terrible funnel of dark clouds and swirling cosmic energy began to descend from the sky miles away from town. It wasn't a localized weather phenomenon. It was a massive, brute force tear in spatial space. The Bifrost. Someone approaches, Naruto cautioned, his tail bristling aggressively beneath his cargo pants. Thor rose up and followed Naruto's gaze. He witnessed the spinning cosmic storm strike the desert floor with a blinding blaze of light. Thor breathed, Heimdall, feeling a renewed sense of hope. My friends. They have come for me. Naruto did not share this hope. He closed his eyes and directed his sovereign senses toward the collision zone. He looked for the biological rhythms of living things. He looked for heartbeats, the bioelectric hum of neurological systems. He discovered nothing. However, he felt an energy that made his blood run cold. It was a gigantic, walking singularity with pure, black magical intent. It had no soul. It had no pulse. It was completely devoid of life, emitting a heat that smelt of ozone and death. It's not your friends, Thor, Naruto remarked, his voice icy and ruthless like a shinobi prepared for war. A mile away, at the outskirts of the shield encampment, Agent Coulson came out of his command tent with a cup of coffee. He focused on the big dust cloud arriving from the desert. An enormous, metallic figure emerged from the heat distortion, striding slowly and purposefully towards the settlement. Agent Jasper Sidwell approached Coulson, lowering his binoculars. Is that one of Stark's? I don't know, Coulson admitted, his instincts screaming. He seized the megaphone. Hello. You are using unregistered weapons technology. Identify yourself. The destroyer didn't stop. The segmented metal panels on the face slid back, revealing a hollow cavity. A blazing, deafening blast of pure, concentrated Odin force emerged from the faceplate. The object collided with a nearby shield delivery truck, causing a massive explosion of fire and shrapnel. Engage, Coulson screamed, drawing his sidearm and taking cover behind a concrete barrier. Dozens of operatives opened fire. Assault weapons, large mounted machine guns, and grenade launchers showered down on the metallic titan. The destroyer moved through the crossfire like it was a light shower. The explosive shells detonated against its Uru armor, leaving no scratches. It turned its head and fired a continuous, sweeping beam of fire, destroying the encampment, melting steel and turning sand into glass. Fall back to the town, Coulson ordered, watching his men be routed in seconds. We can't stop it. The earth in Puente Antiguo trembled as the automaton approached with thundering footsteps. Jane, Darcy, and Eric hurried out of the diner, horrified by the gigantic, smoking metal golem marching down the street. Shield cars were quickly retreating, their tires screeching as they left the perimeter. Thor stood in the center of the road, face pale. Thor murmured, "The destroyer," with horror. Loki has sent it. It is an instrument of absolute eradication. It cannot be stopped by mortal hands. Then we will evacuate the mortals, Naruto said to Jane and Eric. Get everyone out of the buildings. Move them to the edge of the desert. Go. Jane cried. What about you? Over the sound of exploding cars on the street. I am going to test its iron, Naruto stated. Naruto stepped out onto the dusty main street. He rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck. He took a deep breath, letting go of the heavy suppression he was holding in his core. The golden aura ignited. It not only glowed but also raged. A gigantic, dazzling shaft of golden plasma erupted from his torso and flew high into the air. The asphalt under his feet melted instantaneously. The tremendous, searing heat smashed the windows of surrounding stores. The destroyer halted its march. Despite without a consciousness, the automaton's magical targeting systems identified a significant threat in its route. It disregarded the fleeing shield operatives. It ignored the fleeing citizens. Its hollow faceplate secured the golden warrior. You have no heartbeat, Naruto screamed across the distance, his voice quivering with the crushing pressure of his primal pulse. Let us see if you can bleed. The destroyer's faceplates slipped backward. The molten orange fire grew deep within its core, preparing for a deadly strike. Naruto did not wait. Shunshin. Naruto vanished in a split second, covering a distance of 200 yards. He materialized right in front of the gigantic metal behemoth, suspended in the air. He brought his right fist back and used his Zenkai-adapted muscular density to channel golden plasma directly into his knuckles. He smashed his fist into the center of the destroyer's chest plate. The impact was catastrophic. A tremendous, apparent shockwave of golden energy and displaced air erupted outward, destroying a neighboring petrol station and ripping the roofs off surrounding structures. Naruto's blow was powerful enough to destroy the Ironmonger. It would have pierced a strongly armored battleship. The destroyer was hurled backward, causing deep pits in the road as it skidded 50 yards. However, it did not shatter. Naruto landed lightly and his eyes widened slightly. He gazed at his fist. The flesh around his knuckles had scorched, and a thin puff of smoke rose from the contact. He gazed up at the destroyer. The robot gradually straightened its stance. There was a faint, luminous dent in its chest plate, but the enchanted Uru metal was already repairing itself, with magical energy realigning the armor's molecular structure. Magic, Naruto muttered, recognizing the durability of an enchanted object. Brute force alone would not be sufficient. The destroyer's faceplate blazed. Naruto was blinded by a concentrated Odin Force laser traveling at light speed. Naruto braced himself for the hit by crossing his arms and increasing the density of his solar envelope. The beam struck him in the center. Unlike the physical bullets of the 10 rings and the concussive power of the Hulk, this was pure, destructive magic. It did not simply push, it burnt. The Odin Force collided brutally with Naruto's primal plasma. The force of the beam pushed Naruto backward. He was pushed through the air, crashing violently through a bank's brick wall, going through the inside and blasting out the rear wall, burying him deep in the desert sand outside of town. Naruto! Thor yelled, watching the youngster be blasted by a laser capable of destroying Asgardian gods. The destroyer slowly turned its head, emanating fire from its faceplate. After neutralizing the principal threat, it focused its attention on the fallen prince, who stood hopelessly in the street. Thor gulped hard and gazed at his empty hands. He was mortal, he was delicate. But when he gazed at the terrified civilians running into the desert, he remembered what the Golden Boy had told him that morning. You fight to protect, not to conquer. Thor Odinson set his jaw. He did not run. He puffed out his chest and started walking forward, putting himself directly between the unstoppable magical golem and the people of Puente Antiguo. Thor Odinson approached the towering metal golem. He had no armor, no hammer, and no golden aura. He was a man dressed in a plaid shirt and blue jeans, equipped only with the abrupt and scary clarity of true leadership. The destroyer's faceplate glowed as a deadly orange fire built in its hollow core. It detected the mortal in its path and calculated the microsecond it would take to vaporize him. Thor cried, "Brother!" over the whistling desert wind. The destroyer paused. The internal fires dimmed slightly, and the magical construct paused to await the command of its master, who was watching from light years distant with unfeeling eyes. Thor apologized for any wrongdoing that led to the street's unexpected quiet. He spoke without arrogance. He talked with the crushing desperation of a brother. Thor raised his arms wide, exposing his mortal chest entirely. But these people are innocent, Thor said softly. Taking their lives will gain you nothing. So take mine, and end this. Loki viewed the destroyer's vision from inside the Asgardian vault. A deep, terrible struggle raged beneath his emerald eyes, a lifetime of brotherhood versus a lifetime of resentment. The resentment, driven by the horrifying abnormality of the golden boy who saw through his lies, prevailed. The destroyer's faceplates slipped backward. It did not fire a beam. It merely took a giant step forward, extending a large, Uru metal palm and landing a powerful backhand hit. The hit sounded like a car crash. Thor was propelled through the air and landed harshly on the dirt road. He didn't bounce up. He lay quite still. Thor, Jane Foster cried, breaking free from Eric Selvig's clutches and rushing towards the fallen prince. She sank to her knees in the ground and grabbed his shoulders. Thor's face was bruised, and blood dripped from his nose and mouth. His chest rose and fell in shallow, agonizingly slow movements. Every rib in his mortal body had broken on impact. "It's over," Thor whispered, his voice barely audible and blood on his lips. He gazed up at Jane with a faint, calm smile on his face. He failed to rescue his throne, but he did save her. Thor's eyes slid shut. His mortal heart, beaten and crushed, had quit beating. The destroyer turned its back on the corpse, fulfilling its programming. It began marching back toward the desert, ready to find the golden anomaly it had buried in the sand. The rain ceased miles away in the shield crater. Agent Coulson stood on the rim, observing the sky and listening to news of the town's destruction. Suddenly, a subsonic buzz vibrated through the muck. Coulson gazed down. Mjolnir was trembling. The heavy, unyielding slab of metal, which a small army of trucks and cables had failed to move by a single millimeter, was fiercely rocking on its stone pedestal. Mjolnir pierced the pristine blue sky with a thunderous crack, launching itself aloft. It didn't just fly. It ripped through the air, leaving a path of pure, crackling blue lightning in its wake. "Director," Coulson muttered into his comms, watching the hammer fade beyond the horizon. "We just lost the asset." Jane wailed at Puente Antiguo over Thor's lifeless body. The clouds over the town darkened and formed a strong vortex. The wind screeched, ripping the roofs off the remaining structures. Jane looked up. A streak of lightning fell from the sky. She flung herself backward as Mjolnir smacked into Thor's outstretched palm. The Uru metal made contact with his skin, triggering cosmic judgment. The sacrifice had been absolute. The hubris was gone. The king was deserving. A blinding pillar of heavenly lightning struck the ground, completely engulfing Thor's body. The thunder was apocalyptic, shaking the very foundations of New Mexico. As the light faded, the mortal was gone. Thor Odinson stood towering at the center of the crater. The All-Father's almighty magic had healed the blood and wounds in an instant. He was dressed in glorious, dazzling Asgardian armor, with a bright crimson cloak billowing in the roaring wind. Mjolnir, in his grasp, crackled with uncontrolled lightning. The destroyer saw a significant increase in divine energy. Thor twisted Mjolnir by its leather strap, causing a localized whirlwind. "Have at thee!" Thor yelled, hurling himself into the air and straight toward the metal giant. Naruto Uzumaki's biology was at odds with itself, hidden beneath 10 feet of crushed brick and desert sand half a mile outside town. The Odin force had been catastrophic. It was a spell meant to undo reality. When the beam hit him, it destroyed his solar envelope, severely scorching his flesh and breaking his collarbone. For 5 painful minutes, he lay in the darkness, his heart hardly pounding. But he was a Saiyan. The catastrophic thermal and kinetic shock did not destroy his cells, but rather activated their ultimate defense system. The Zenkai adaptation. The golden primal pulse sensed defeat deep within its center. The cells furiously cannibalized the remaining solar radiation in his system, causing a terrifyingly rapid state of hypercompression. Naruto's eyes opened in the darkness below the rubble. They were no longer simply blue. They were almost completely white, shining with a tremendous, dazzling brilliance. The golden aura that distinguished his strength faded and was quickly absorbed back into his skin. The air surrounding him became terrifyingly still, rather than hot. The aura then surged outward again, making a sound similar to shredding fabric. However, it was no longer gold. The plasma was dazzling, blinding, and white-hot. The rubble above him evaporated rather than simply exploding. Naruto ascended from the crater and levitated smoothly into the sky. His dark clothing had been burned away, showing the dense, perfect muscle beneath, which was now illuminated by the searing, white-hot light of his evolved primal pulse. His sovereign senses surged through town. He could feel Thor's huge, thrumming, heavenly heartbeat. He sensed the destroyer's cold, soulless nothingness. Shunshin. Back in town, Thor engaged in deadly combat. He swung Mjolnir down with a stunning overhead strike, breaking the destroyer's metal faceplate. The automaton lurched backward, but the charmed Uru metal quickly began to reconfigure itself, pushing the dent out. The destroyer fired a face beam. Thor intercepted it with Mjolnir, the sheer might of the magic propelling the god of thunder backward, his boots digging deep pits in the roadway. It repairs itself, Thor said, gritting his teeth against the heat. Physical strikes will not end it. Then we will break it completely, a voice echoed, vibrating with a peculiar, heavy sound that made Thor's teeth hurt. Thor looked to his left. Naruto was 10 feet above the earth, surrounded by a white-hot glow that made Thor squint. The kid didn't look like a boy anymore, he looked like a star in the sky. You live. Thor beamed furiously, happy to see his friend alive. I changed, Naruto said, his eyes burning bright as he looked at the destroyer. The metal is enchanted. It absorbs kinetic energy and repairs itself. Brute force won't work. We need to overload the core. Naruto put out his right hand. He used the newly condensed, white-hot plasma from his Zenkai-boosted primal pulse. He didn't make a little spherical the size of a golf ball. He put a lot of force into the palm of his hand and quickly spun and compressed it. A primal Rasengan came to life with a roar. It was as big as a boulder and shone with a bright, dazzling white light. The sphere's spinning motion generated a vacuum that pulled the town's debris into its orbit. Naruto cried over the howling wind, it's dense. He was having a hard time controlling the sheer amount of strength he had gained. But it doesn't have the right frequency to get past the magic. Charge my sphere, Odin-san. Give it the storm. Thor got it right away. The Prince of Asgard held Mjolnir aloft in the stormy sky. The gloomy clouds angrily answered his appeal. A huge, jagged bolt of pure, heavenly blue lightning hit the hammer and lit up the landscape for miles. Thor flung Mjolnir down, not at the destroyer, but at the huge, spinning white-hot ball in Naruto's grasp. The lightning from Asgard hit the primal Rasengan. The reaction was a disaster. The divine magic of the lightning and the alien, biological plasma of the Saiyan mixed perfectly. The sphere turned a scary, electric blue-white and sparked furiously with wild, crackling ozone. The storm Rasengan. Hold him, Naruto yelled. Thor threw himself at the destroyer, wrapping his huge arms around its body and locking its arms to its sides. He was like an immovable, heavenly anchor. Naruto was gone. In a tiny amount of time, he crossed the distance. He stood just in front of the destroyer, his arm outstretched, sending the huge, electrified storm Rasengan straight into the incandescent, empty core of the metal giant. The crash went against the laws of physics. The enchanted Uru metal tried to withstand the blow, but the storm Rasengan was more than just a force, it was a whirling vortex of solar plasma that the Odin force had fired up. It was like a metaphysical drill that broke the spells that held the armor together. For a scary second, the whole world went entirely silent. The destroyer then blew up. It didn't explode with fire. A huge shockwave of blue and white light spread out in a perfect sphere, covering the town. The Uru metal broke into a million little, harmless pieces that fell on the desert like black snow. Thor struck the ground and rolled to a stop. His armor was smoking a little from being so close to the blast. Naruto landed softly next to him, and the white-hot aura quickly pulled back into his skin. He fell to one knee and breathed deeply. The huge amount of energy he had used finally caught up with him. The Zenkai had pushed his body too far, and the exhaustion hit him like a tidal wave. Thor got up and brushed the dark ash from his cape. He stepped over to Naruto and held out a huge, armored hand. Naruto looked up and took the hand, which Thor used to help him up. You fought with the honor of an Aesir, Naruto Uzumaki, Thor said, his voice full of great respect. You caught the lightning and held the line. Naruto said, you threw away your life for a village that wasn't yours. He smiled tiredly and honestly. Thor Odin-san, you deserve the hammer. The roar of powerful engines disrupted the peace of the desert before they could celebrate anymore. A line of black shield. SUVs sped down the main street and came to a stop a few yards away. Agent Coulson got out of the front car, which was surrounded by operatives with a lot of guns. He gazed at the broken pieces of the invincible golem, then at the glowing alien teen and the god of thunder in armor. Coulson replied dryly, "I see you found your hammer, Dr. Blake," and put his hands in his pockets. Thor stepped forward and casually spun Mjolnir by the strap. "Son of Cool, you fight with honor, but your methods are sneaky. We are now friends, but I have to go back to Asgard. I have to deal with my brother's betrayal." Thor looked up at the sky. "Heimdall, open the Bifrost." Nothing happened. Thor frowned. "Heimdall." The sky was still clear, though. Thor's face got darker. "Loki has blinded the gatekeeper. Or worse." Thor gazed at Jane with deep anguish in his eyes. "I need to find a way back. The 9 realms are in danger." Naruto crossed his arms and forgot about being tired for a time. "Your brother talked about making peace with the frost giants. If he controls your village, he also controls an army." Coulson went forward with a secure satellite phone in his hand. Coulson remarked, "I don't know much about frost giants." His face was serious. "But we have our own problem. Mr. Uzumaki, Director Fury is on the phone. He says that Tony Stark's arc reactor is failing and that an army of drones just attacked the Stark Expo in New York." Naruto's eyes got big. There was a fire in the village. Naruto's shinobi instincts kicked in and he said, "I must go back to the Man of Iron." Thor stepped up next to him and raised Mjolnir. "Lead the way, Golden One. Let Midgard see the wrath of the storm. A warrior does not leave his brother to fight alone." The Stark Expo in Flushing Meadows was a stunning example of modern architecture, a huge, brightly lit testimony to the bright future of humanity. It was a war zone tonight. The famous Unisphere dropped broken glass all over the place. Heavy artillery ripped up the groomed lawns of the Japanese garden, leaving muddy trenches. The shouts of humans running away had finally stopped. All that was left was the loud, mechanical roar of huge rotary cannons and the high-pitched whine of repulsor explosions. Iron Man and War Machine were standing back to back in the shallow ornamental pond in the middle of the garden. They were absolutely surrounded. 36 massively armored hammer drones, which are big, unpiloted bipedal tanks that stand for the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, made a flawlessly timed, tightening kill box. "Rhodey," Tony mumbled, his voice tense across the radio. He fired 2 repulsor blasts, which took the head off of an Air Force drone, but 2 more quickly took its place. "Tell me you brought the big guns." "I brought all the guns, Tony," Rhodey cried back. The War Machine armor's hefty shoulder-mounted miniguns spun with a terrible roar, tearing through a line of army drones. "But there are too many of them. And your suit looks like it's powered by batteries." Rhodey was right. The Mark 6 armor Tony was wearing was badly damaged, and the HUD was flashing a loud, critical red alert. Blood toxicity, 89%. Output of the arc reactor, 14%. The corners of Tony's vision were getting blurry. The dark, dead lines of palladium poisoning had crawled up his neck and were evident even through the suit's undersuit. He was sweating a lot, and his heart was having a hard time pumping the deadly sludge through his veins. He had flown to New York as soon as Vanko took control of the drones. He knew it was a one-way trip unless Bruce Banner finished making the new element back in Malibu. Click, click, click. Rhodey's shoulder cannon spun around and around. "I'm out," Rhodey said as he dropped his hefty gauntlets and switched to his secondary wrist-mounted submachine pistols. "Tony, we need a bottleneck. We can't fight in a circle." "Working on it," Tony said, breathing heavily as he pointed his right arm at the sky to use his cutting laser. A huge, powerful thump shook the ground just in front of them before he could shoot. The hammer drone's circle broke up. Ivan Vanko was walking through the wreckage, his hefty metal boots shattering the rubble. He has made a lot of improvements to his whiplash armor. It was thicker, thickly plated, and 2 huge, crackling whips of pure, raw plasma came out of his forearms. "Stark," Vanko's voice came from his external speakers, thick with a Russian accent and years of anger, "you lose." Vanko swung his right whip forward. It hit Tony right in the chest. The armor's dampeners were entirely bypassed by the sheer kinetic and thermal stress. Tony was pushed back, breaking through a stone bridge and landed hard in the mud. The arc reactor flashed dangerously low. "Tony, Rhodey shouted, pointing his wrist guns at Vanko. Vanko used his second whip to catch the hail of bullets, melting the lead in the air, and then he hit War Machine, wrapping the plasma cord around Rhodey's neck and hauling him to his knees. Tony had a hard time standing up. His suit was groaning and his body was faltering. The drones got closer, and their targeting lasers made dozens of red dots on the two fallen heroes. Jarvis, Tony wheezed, his eyes dropping. Send all of life support to the repulsors. Sir, that will cause cardiac arrest within. Do it. The drone's targeting lasers suddenly stopped working. The neon lights in the Stark Expo pavilions around them went up and then went out entirely in a spray of sparks. Flushing Meadows fell into a deep, unnatural quiet. The city's background noise seemed to fade away. Vanko stopped and looked up at the sky. The clouds above New York City were getting darker and darker, forming a huge, unnatural vortex. A drop in pressure so strong that it made everyone's ears pop in the park. Crack. A jagged, blinding bolt of blue lightning hit the very top of the Unisphere. What is that? Rhodey asked, fighting against the plasma whip that was suffocating him. Tony, did you call in an airstrike? I didn't call anyone, Tony mumbled as he looked up at the sky. From the tumultuous vortex, two separate beams of light fell. One was a loud, crackling blue lightning bolt. The other was a white-hot plasma streak that was so bright it hurt to look at. They both struck the ground at the same time, but on opposing sides of the killbox. The effects were terrible. The blue meteor's concussion blasted a dozen hammer drones into the air. A huge electromagnetic pulse damaged their internal circuitry right away. The white meteor didn't knock the drones over, it melted them. The armor plating on the 5 closest drones melted right away because of the intense, radiating heat, turning them into pools of seething slag. The dust settled. Thor Odinson stood at Tony's left, bathed in the light of the Unisphere. His shiny Asgardian armor shone in the sun, and his red cape snapped in the breeze. He casually spun Mjolnir with his right hand. Naruto Uzumaki was standing to Tony's right. Tony blinked because his poisoned brain was having trouble processing what he saw. Naruto was no longer shining gold. His aura was a bright, blazing white that was so strong it changed the air around him. The boy seemed wild, strong, and completely unaffected by the laws of physics. Stark, Naruto's voice echoed, and it had a peculiar, weighty sound that made Tony's chest shake. You look awful. You changed your hair, Tony coughed, a feeble smile breaking through the discomfort. Vanko let Rhodey go and looked at the two new people. The data didn't make sense to his targeting computer. One was a huge, localized thunderstorm. The other one was the center of a sun. More targets, Vanko said with a smirk as he spun his plasma whips. Good. You all die at the same time. This mortal speaks with a lot of confidence, Thor said as he rested Mjolnir on his shoulder. He peered at Naruto from the other side of the kill box. Should we test his iron, golden one? Naruto replied. He relies on wires, and his eyes turned white-hot as they locked onto Vanko. Cut them. The last 20 hammer drones shot at the two strange things. Thor laughed, and it was a loud, happy sound. He threw Mjolnir. The enchanted hammer didn't just hit a drone. It flew in a way that was impossible for it to do so, shattering through the reinforced chests of 6 drones in 2 seconds and then perfectly returned to Thor's hand. Naruto didn't throw things. Shunshin. He disappeared. To Vanko's superior optics, the teen was no longer there. A microsecond later, an Air Force drone was abruptly shot straight up into the sky, and an invisible force crushed its chest. Naruto came back in the middle of the Marine drone squad. He didn't use the taijutsu that caused a lot of damage and was powerful. The Zenkai energy was too thick and white-hot. He needed to be very, very careful or he would destroy the whole park. Naruto moved with deadly grace and fluidity. He tapped the joint of a drone's knee, and the metal broke right away because of the compressed kinetic plasma. He put his hand flat against the chest of another person. The heat from the body melted the arc reactor housing right away, turning off the machine. The drones turned into a graveyard of sparkling, worthless metal in 10 seconds. Vanko screamed in rage and swung both of his plasma whips forward, one targeted for Naruto, and the other for Thor. Thor seized the whip with Mjolnir's grip, and the Asgardian metal easily absorbed the plasma. Naruto didn't stop it. He reached out and grabbed the crackling plasma whip with his hand. Vanko's eyes got big with fear. The whip was hot enough to burn at over 5,000 degrees. It should have cut off the boy's hand right away. But Naruto's solar envelope was thicker and hotter. He grasped the plasma cable without a care in the world. "You depend on heat," Naruto said in a chilly voice. Naruto pulled the whip back. The sheer physical might knocked Vanko to the ground, pulling the heavy Russian armor through the muck. Naruto yelled, "Odin-san!" The core. Thor didn't think twice. He jumped into the skies and called down a huge bolt of lightning from the storm above, sending it straight through Mjolnir. "For Midgard!" Thor yelled as he slammed the hammer down on Vanko's chest plate. The lightning went through the whiplash armor, overloading the arc reactor and frying all of the internal systems. Vanko's suit locked up completely and he spasmed. The plasma whips fizzled out and died in the mud. The fight was over. Rhodey peered at the smoking Russian, then at the glowing teen and the man in armor with a cape. Rhodey breathed heavily and lifted his visor. "Tony," he said. "Who the hell are these people?" "Coworkers," Tony moaned as his outfit fell to its knees. The wind was suddenly cut short. A fast, high-pitched beep 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 started coming from Vanko's chest plate and from the wreckage of every hammer drone that had fallen in the park at the same time. Vanko smiled through the blood and shattered nose. "You lose." "Sir," Jarvis's voice said in a panic. "Every drone has started a self-destruct sequence at the same time. It is thought that the yield will level the whole expo." Rhodey screamed, "Civilians," as he looked toward the far-off pavilions where people were still leaving. "Tony, we can't get rid of the blast radius." Tony tried to get up, but the suit was dead. His blood was so poisonous that it was about to break. He couldn't see anything. He fell into the mud and passed out. "Tony." Rhodey fell down next to his friend. Naruto and Thor looked at each other once and understood what the other was saying. "Containment," Naruto yelled. Thor spun Mjolnir so fast that it made a huge, confined wind vortex. He hit the ground with the hammer, which made a dome of heavy, whirling air pressure around the whole Japanese garden. Naruto didn't hold back. He let his Zenkai-boosted primal pulse out in all its terrible fullness. The white-hot aura burst forth, pushing all the way to the edge of the garden. He turned the energy into a huge, solid wall of pure kinetic plasma that lined the inside of Thor's wind dome. It was a rough, unfinished version of a shinobi barrier ninjutsu that was powered by the energy of a dying star. Beep 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 beep. 30 arc reactors went off at the same time. The explosion was the end of the world. A huge ball of fire and shrapnel grew bigger and bigger, with the goal of destroying Flushing Meadows. It hit the barrier that was white-hot. Naruto yelled and fell to one knee. The sheer, growing kinetic power of 30 bombs pushing on his chakra network was quite painful. His muscles ripped and healed right away, and his cells burned solar radiation at an unsustainable pace. "Hold!" Thor yelled, adding more lightning to the outer wind dome to help the teenager's barrier. For 3 horrible seconds, the garden turned into an oven of death that was stuck and growing. Then the pressure gave way. The explosion used up all the oxygen in the dome and fell in on itself, leaving behind a huge, stifling cloud of black smoke. The wall fell down. Naruto fell to the ground in the burned, fused dirt, and his white-hot aura faded away completely, leaving him in his normal, tired state. Sweat stuck the golden hair to his forehead. Thor dropped Mjolnir, his chest heaving and his cape burned. He turned his head. The garden was a glass crater, but the pavilions were only 50 yards away and were fine. The civilians were safe. Rhodey pulled the faceplate off of Tony's armor. Rhodey shouted, "Tony, stay with me," and slapped Tony's pallid, lifeless cheek. The dark purple veins were now clearly seen climbing up Tony's jawline. "He's not breathing." Naruto forced himself up with his shaky arms. He crawled over to the millionaire who had fallen. Naruto put 2 fingers on Tony's neck. There was no more pulse. The heart had ceased beating. The palladium had triumphed. "Move," Naruto told Rhodey. Naruto put his hands flat on Tony's armored chest, right over the dying Mark I arc reactor. He didn't have the strength to fight again, but he had enough chakra to shock someone back to life. He sent a strong, focused bolt of bioelectricity right through the metal and into Tony's heart muscle. Tony abruptly arched off the ground, and a huge, desperate breath of air tore from his lungs. His eyes flew open, wide and scared. "Doc," Tony said, his voice faint and hoarse. "Where's the doctor?" The sound of heavy rotors cut through the smog. A huge, sleek shield Quinjet fell from the sky and landed straight up in the burned garden. The back ramp smashed down before the landing gear was fully deployed. Agent Coulson raced down the ramp with a medical team. Dr. Bruce Banner was right behind them. He was carrying a big box with lead lining. Bruce cried, "Tony," as he ran toward the armored guy who had collapsed. Naruto stepped back so that the medical crew could get to Tony. Bruce fell to his knees and opened the confinement box. Inside was a flawlessly made, triangular core of a brand new element. Bruce quickly remarked, "I got the data you sent from your father's diorama." His hands shook as he picked up a special extraction tool. "I made the isotope. All we have to do is switch out the core." Rhodey and Bruce worked hard, even though the god of thunder and a bright alien were standing just behind them. Bruce wrenched the dangerous palladium core out of Tony's chest with a forceful twist and threw it into the mud. He pushed the new, triangular part into the housing. Click. A bright, pure, clear white light shot out of Tony's chest. Tony took a big breath and shuddered. The tightness in his chest went away right away. He stared at the new reactor and then at Bruce. "Doc, it took you long enough," Tony said, yet his eyes showed how relieved he was. Tony tilted his head and looked past Bruce at the two people standing in the smoke. Naruto nodded tiredly and respectfully. Thor smiled with pride and joy. "Coulson," Tony said weakly as the medics put him on a stretcher. Agent Coulson moved onward. "Mr. Stark, you've made a mess of things here." Tony shook his finger at Naruto and Thor. "The kid gets a raise. And the guy with the hammer, buy him a shawarma. We're going to start a union." Coulson gazed at the gathering that had gathered. A billionaire with a lot of brains in a metal outfit. A scientist who became a monster of wrath and green. A boy who fought with the sun's strength. And the real god of thunder. Coulson tapped his ear. "Director Fury," Coulson responded, his voice completely flat. "You're going to want to come down here. I think the initiative just put itself together." The SHIELD helicarrier was a marvel of modern aeronautical engineering. A floating fortress built to represent absolute, unquestionable global authority. That authority was being entirely ignored deep inside its heavily armored shell, in a secure, fortified medical bay. Tony Stark, who was lying comfortably on a sleek medical bed, said, "I'm just saying, the structure of your mashed potatoes is fundamentally flawed." He had on a new black t-shirt, and the pale, pure white light of the new triangular arc reactor was shining steadily through the cloth. The necrotic purple veins that had been bothering him for months were already receding quickly, and his body was getting rid of the palladium toxins at an amazing rate. He pointed his finger at the middle of the room. Naruto Uzumaki sat with his legs crossed on the steel floor that had been reinforced. There were a lot of empty metal trays, destroyed MREs, meals ready to eat, and a pile of SHIELD cafeteria-grade protein bars around him. The Zenkai change at the Stark Expo had burnt through his solar reserves at an alarming rate. His Saiyan body was currently screaming for calories to help mend the ripped muscle fibers and steady his very compressed chakra network. He was eating at a terrifyingly fast, mechanical pace, hardly stopping to breathe. "Food is fuel, Stark," Naruto said through a mouthful of fake scrambled eggs and a liter of orange juice. "Texture doesn't matter, only the number of calories does." "You're a rude, uncultured kid," Tony said with a sigh, touching his chest. "But you kept this thing going long enough for the doc to make the switch. When we get back to Malibu, I'll buy you a 5-star steakhouse. The whole thing." Drive. Bruce Banner stepped by the cardiac monitors and looked over Tony's bloodwork while adjusting his glasses. "Your heavy metal toxicity is down to 4%, Tony. That new element is completely safe for living things, and it makes energy in a way that goes against the standard model of quantum physics." "My old man left the blueprints in a theme park diorama," Tony remarked, his voice now full of reverence. He was a tough guy, but he could see the future. The hefty hydraulic doors of the medical bay abruptly opened with a hiss. Thor Odinson walked into the room. He had taken off his heavy Asgardian war armor and put on a pair of tactical fatigues that SHIELD had given him. They were rather tight over his huge shoulders. A leather loop on his belt held Mjolnir.
The healers on this flying ship are very good, Thor said as he took an unopened carton of food from Naruto's pile and ripped it open. Even though their cures don't hurt like Asgardian meat.
Are you all having a party? The voice sounded low and rough, like sandpaper.
The room got quiet. Nick Fury, who was in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D., went into the medical bay. He wore a long black leather trench coat and his one exposed eye scanned the room with brutal, calculated accuracy. Agent Phil Coulson and a heavily armed tactical detail were on either side of him, but Fury told the guards to go back into the corridor.
Fury stopped at the end of Tony's bed. He stared at the reactor, which was glowing in the shape of a triangle. Fury responded, I told you I was keeping an eye on you, Stark. I didn't think you would build a new heart, team up with the guy who destroyed my base in New Mexico, and get a glowing teenager to blow up half of Queens. Tony simply stated, first of all, Flushing Meadows is a park, and he wasn't scared at all. Second, we contained the explosion. You're welcome for saving the city, by the way. And third, who are you? Fury replied coldly, I am the man who cleans up the messes when billionaires, scientists, and aliens decide to play God. Fury looked down at the floor and focused his one eye on Naruto. The director of S.H.I.E.L.D. had looked at the secret reports. He had seen the telemetry from Afghanistan and New Mexico that had been severely censored. He knew that this adolescent had physically caught a supersonic rocket, overpowered a 12-foot metal suit, and made a plasma field that could melt heavily armored drones. Uzumaki Naruto, Fury remarked, trying out the name. There's no record of you. No history. Agent Coulson says you call yourself a shinobi, which means, ninja. Naruto ate his dinner. He put the metal tray down and stood up carefully. He wiped his mouth with the back of his palm, and Fury's one-of-a-kind look met his blue eyes precisely. Naruto said, you are the leader of the shadows, feeling the man's icy, broad network of power. You carry the weight of many lives. But you come into this room expecting us to bow down to you. I expect you to work with me, Fury said, crossing his arms. The world just got a lot bigger and a lot more dangerous. I'm putting together a response team called the Avengers Initiative. It's a group of amazing people who will fight the battles that humans could never win. You four just proved that the idea works. Thor stepped forward, his huge body looming over the director. We are not a concept, he said. We fought together because our paths crossed. But my path leads away from Midgard. My brother has taken the throne of Asgard and blinded the gatekeeper. I need to find a way home. Fury glanced up at the Thunder God. He didn't move. That could be a problem, Point Break, Tony said as he leaned back on the bed. Your magical rainbow bridge is closed. You're stuck here unless you have a spaceship in your pocket. Fury added in a low voice, we might have another option. The room became quiet. Bruce's scientific curiosity was immediately sparked when he heard the word, portal. You have the technology to break a localized Einstein-Rosen bridge? Not the technology. The key, Fury said. He pointed to Coulson, who came up and gave Fury a tablet that was very hard to read. Fury opened it and threw it onto Tony's lap. Tony stared at the television. Bruce and Thor crowded around. Naruto stayed where he was, and his sovereign senses picked up the faint, residual hum coming from the digital image. It was a picture of a shining blue cube that was perfect. Fury's voice dropped to a very secret level as he said, the Tesseract. It was found in the ocean decades ago. It is a source of unlimited, renewable cosmic energy. Dr. Eric Selvig has been brought in to help with the project. Thor's breath got stuck in his throat. The Tesseract. Odin's treasure room's most valuable item. It was lost to Midgard centuries ago. It is a vessel of absolute spatial power. It doesn't just make energy, Director Fury. It is a door. Can it open a door to Asgard? Naruto said, moving closer and staring at the picture. Could the cube fold dimensions if it could fold space? Could it get to the elemental nations? Thor looked at Naruto and saw the optimism in the boy's eyes. Theoretically, yes, he said. It can cross the world tree, but it needs a perfect, terrifying mind to figure out the coordinates, or it will tear the user apart. Tony tapped the tablet's screen. His smart brain was already figuring out how to solve the problem. A localized spatial fold. We'd need to build a specialized containment field to stabilize the aperture. And a massive energy spike to initiate the sequence. Bigger than my reactor. Fury responded. That's why you're here, Stark.
SHIELD is building a joint research facility. Project PEGASUS. I want you, Dr. Banner, and Dr. Selvig to find a way to use it.
Fury turned to Thor and Naruto. And I want you two to keep it safe. If this cube is as powerful as you say, other people know it's down here too. Naruto looked over the director. Fury worked by using fear and control. Naruto had never seen a way out of this universe that didn't just mean staying alive. He saw a way that has to do with the universe. Naruto said, "We will protect the cube," and his voice sounded like a cage's, thus he made the choice for the group. But SHIELD doesn't tell us what to do. The Man of Iron, the Doctor, and the Prince. We are an independent village, and we fight on our own terms. Fury's one eye got smaller. He didn't like wildcards. He loathed power that he couldn't control. But he saw the bullet holes in Tony's armor, the molten slag from the hammer drones, and the hole in the ground in New Mexico. He realized his cage wasn't robust enough to keep them in. "Fine," Fury said, his face showing a bleak, unwilling respect. "You can do what you want, but you have to answer when I call." Fury turned around and left the hospital bay, his trench coat trailing behind him. Coulson was left to deal with the logistics. Tony let out a big breath and threw the iPad onto the bed. That sounded a lot like a job offer. "I hate working for the government." "We don't work for them," Naruto said, his golden hair shining in the room's clean light. He looked at the three men that were with him. A billionaire who had destroyed his heart and put it back together. A scientist who was being persecuted yet had learned how to control his beast. A prince who had fallen and learned how important life is. Naruto put out his hand and kept it in the middle of the room. Naruto stated in a gentle voice, "We work for each other." Thor smiled, a big, happy smile, and hit Naruto's hand with his huge fist. Tony rolled his eyes, but as he tapped his knuckles against theirs, he smiled for real. Bruce paused for a while since he was always afraid of the Hulk. But he looked at the golden child who had stared down the beast without blinking, and he added his fist to the circle. The Avengers were not a team of SHIELD agents, they were a village of shinobi. In an asteroid field at the far limit of known space, light years distant, in the cold, empty vacuum. The sanctuary. Loki, the god of mischief, knelt down on the cold, sharp stone. He was stripped of his royal Asgardian armor, and he looked pale, empty, and very angry. In the dark, a huge, shrouded creature loomed above him. The other. "The Tesseract has awakened," the other growled, his voice a horrible, scraping sound that resonated through the abyss. "It is on a small world, a world of humans. They would use its power, but our ally knows how it works better than they ever will." Loki looked up, and his green eyes were filled with a terrible, poisonous desire. "My brother is stuck there. A mortal in an iron shell and a beast of golden fire are keeping him safe. They killed the destroyer. I need an army." The other moved out of the way. A giant was sitting on a huge, floating throne made of stone and gold. His skin was a dark, damaged purple. He didn't say anything, he just opened his hand. A lengthy, golden scepter lay in the palm of the Titan's hand. At its tip, there was a jewel that shone with a pure, beautiful blue light. The stone of the mind. "He is ready to lead," the other said in a low voice as he turned back to Loki. "And our Chitauri will follow. The world will be his. The universe will be yours." Loki reached out and wrapped his pale hands around the scepter's hilt. He could feel the chilly, whispering power of the Infinity Stone seep into his head. He saw glimpses of Earth that had been conquered. He saw Thor on his knees, chained up. And he saw the strange person with golden hair bleeding out in the dirt. Loki pledged, "I will bring you the Tesseract," and a nasty, scary smile spread across his face. "And I will set their village on fire." Stay tuned for more. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this video. I'm thrilled you watched the video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe for even more exciting content coming your way soon.